to the president, with warnings that if the strait isn't opened, the situation this month will be much worse than last.
The loss of oil in April will be twice the loss of oil in March. I think it will cut the economic growth in many countries, and especially in emerging and developing countries where they don't have the hard currencies, they may be even bigger difficulty. And we may well see, Nikolai, in many countries, the rationing of energy may be coming soon.
Whilst the US is a major producer of crude oil, much of which is exported, it also has to import different types of oil to supplement production at domestic refineries. That means it buys and sells on the global market, with prices spiking due to the conflict. Well, Donald Trump might say that America has more crude oil than it needs, and that is certainly true of certain types of oils, but it also needs other types to come into the country, and that's what happens here at the Bayway refinery. They can process up to 250,000 barrels of crude oil every day here. Some of it comes from North Dakota by train. It's shale oil, but the rest, well, that comes by boat from Canada, from the North Sea, and sometimes from West Africa. That means fuel prices are fast going up across the United States, and that is very much the president's problem. Despite still being much lower than elsewhere in the world, the price at the pump here impacts political popularity. In many ways, this is Donald Trump's Suez moment. In 1956, Egypt nationalized the canal that links the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt to regain control. Despite their military success, they were forced to withdraw after pressure from the US and Soviet Union. It weakened their global influence. And maintaining global influence will be key to a president who, despite his mantra of America first, still wants his country to be the leading world power. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, New York.
The US and Israel's war with Iran continues to disrupt global oil supplies. Pakistan has now said it will raise prices for diesel by nearly 55%. Petrol would rise by more than 40%. Osama bin Javed is in Karachi, where he's been speaking to people about the price hikes.
Well, anger and frustration, if I can summarize it in two words. We've been speaking to people in the last half hour when these prices were announced, and it was that frenzy of queues. They've just cleared up behind me. And there's a number of people who we've been speaking to who tell us that this is a situation where they have not been able to plan for. People were frustrated, saying that this is a country which has been able to continue to get the fuel supplies from the Strait of Hormuz, and they cannot understand why the government is reducing those subsidies. The government of Pakistan says that it has been providing about $500 million, give or take, in the last 4 weeks as subsidy. With us is Mehtab, who's a student. We were just speaking to him a moment ago. Mehtab, what is your reaction about this price hike? What do you think?
It's the worst part of life. So if you earn monthly 15 to 20,000, so how you can survive?
But they're going to give you 2,000 rupees a month in subsidy still.
Worst part of life. Worst.
Why?
458 petrol and diesel rises every day, and usually high octane is rises. So how you survive? If you want 15 to 20,000 a month, so how you survive?
Thank you very much. Well, that's one view, and that is kind of the resounding view here, where people have been coming to fuel stations, talking to the petrol, the people who are here, the station owners. There were some fisticuffs here as well. People were angry, but essentially this is what people were expecting as what will happen if the prices continue to rise. Pakistan's government says it is facing a financial crunch. It cannot continue to give unlimited subsidies, and it has to pass on the rising fuel costs to the consumer. We've been speaking to officials here who tell us Pakistan only has about 20 to 24 days of supplies for fuel that is left in the country. And unless the government does something drastic, unless the war stops, unless there is renewed vigor in making sure those supply lines continue, these prices are continuing to go up. And that is the fear here in Karachi at the moment, as the new fuel prices have just come into effect.
Let's take a quick look at some other world news now. US President Donald Trump has fired Attorney General Pam Bondi. Her dismissal comes almost a month after Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was removed from her position. Our chief US correspondent Ellen Fisher reports from Washington, D.C.
She wasn't his first pick for Attorney General.
Such a nice person.
But Pam Bondi was always a Trump loyalist. One of the first cabinet members confirmed by the Senate she was a MAGA favourite, mainly because of her stated commitment to release all the Jeffrey Epstein files, the FBI investigation into the notorious child sex trafficker with high-profile links. She told friendly media his client list was on her desk. She was prepared to release it. But in July last year, the FBI, which comes under Bondi's control, admitted there was no list. That was a strike against her. When questioned about it in Congress, she said it should be more interested in the economy than Epstein.
The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000. You sit here and you attack the president, and I am not going to have it. I'm not going to put up with it.
In his first term, Trump raged against his attorneys general. Meant to be independent, he wanted someone who would pursue his enemies. He made it clear what was required when he posted what was meant to be a private message to Bondi, demanding action against his perceived enemies. She pushed a case against former FBI Director James Comey. It fell apart. That was another strike against her. Trump liked Bondi personally, loved she was combative in his defense.
Have you apologized to President Trump? Have you apologized to President Trump, all of you who participated in those impeachment hearings against Donald Trump? You all should be apologizing.
You're a big fan of Elvis, Pam.
My mother was.
She traveled with him a lot, and he often publicly praised the job she was doing.
Pam Bondi has done a fantastic job. And Pam, would you say a few words, please?
Thank you, President Trump, and thank you for your leadership. And this is all about collaboration.
But her inability to stop the questions over Epstein, her failure to follow through against the president's perceived enemies, frustrated him. And her departure is the latest but biggest upheaval at the Justice Department in Trump's second term. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Washington.
An armed group attack in the northeastern Democratic Republic of Congo has killed at least 70 people. Security officials say fighters from the ADF rebel group stormed a village, opening fire and attacking people with machetes. The group also burned most of the homes in the village in Mombasa, forcing people to flee in panic. Gaza's health ministry is facing a new crisis created by Israel's blockade of the Strip. There is a growing shortage of industrial oil and spare parts that's threatening to close the few medical units still operating in Gaza. Many hospital generators have been damaged. Others are working at the limit of their capacity. If they fail, there will be no power to run Gaza's health system, putting the lives of hundreds of patients at immediate risk. Ibrahim Al-Khalili has this report from Gaza City.
After Israel destroyed more than 80% of Gaza's electricity distribution network and critical equipment, its manpower grid completely collapsed, leaving the Strip in darkness. As a result, hospitals across Gaza now rely entirely on backup generators, with critical spare parts, industrial oil, and power components banned from entering due to Israeli restrictions on so-called dual-use items. Even life-saving services face serious risk.
These generators require regular maintenance, including oil changes, filters, and spare parts. It's important to note that they are currently operating 24 hours a day. At present, spare parts, oils, and filters are not available in the Gaza Strip, which raises serious concerns that these generators may stop functioning, leading to a complete breakdown of health services in ministry facilities.
Al-Daraj Clinic is among the many healthcare centers across Gaza now relying entirely on backup generators. With industrial oil and spare parts in short supply, the clinic and others like it faces an imminent risk of shutting down.
If supplies are not restored within a day or two, services in primary healthcare centers will come to a complete halt. We also have vaccine fridges that are at risk of damage due to the lack of electricity.
For people in Gaza, the electricity crisis has turned everyday health care into a daily struggle.
Today, when someone comes to get an X-ray, they're told the power is out. If they want to receive medication or do a blood test, it's the same problem. There is not enough diesel to keep the generators running.
With power lines damaged or destroyed and essential supplies running low, every hospital, clinic, and patient in Gaza now faces uncertainty.
Behind me are the generators at Al-Shifa Hospital. They are the last line of defense after Israeli attacks destroyed the power system. But now, even that backup is at risk. Without industrial oil and spare parts, these machines are no longer operating, pushing critical health services closer to shutting down, putting thousands of lives in danger. Ibrahim Al-Khalili, Al Jazeera, from Al-Shifa Hospital, Gaza City, Palestine.
Well, stay with us. We'll be back with much more news in around 30 minutes' time. Up next, it's Counting the Cost.
The latest news as it breaks.
A Russian oil tanker is on its way to Cuba carrying something like 670,000 barrels of desperately needed fuel.
With detailed coverage.
We have been hearing a number of gunshots by the Israeli military, and this is another explosion very close to where people are living.
From around the world.
Many have told us that they're here to take a stand against what they call the politics of hate and division.
Can you really bomb a political future into existence?
I don't think that's what we're trying to do. I think the objective here is to destroy the instruments of Iranian state power.
Let me ask you this directly. Is Israel effectively leading U.S. foreign policy?
They want to do a Gaza-like effort on the main power centers in Iran to kill thousands of people, not just the core.
Upfront tackles the big issues only on Al Jazeera.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rishad Salamat. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera. We're looking at the global economic impact of the war in the Middle East. The disruption in the Strait of Hormuz has cut access to 1/5 of the world's oil and gas supply, leaving many countries scrambling for alternatives. So what can they rely on to make up for the shortfall in quick time? Many Asian countries are turning to coal, reopening shuttered plants and expanding production. Policymakers say immediate energy needs supplant environmental concerns about what is widely regarded as the world's dirtiest fossil fuel. Others are hoping to turn to renewables. Solar power is now the cheapest form of electricity in many parts of the world, but renewables, especially wind, have faced hostility from the Trump administration. Can the rest of the world scale up renewable energy production? Countries around the world are struggling to find ways to keep the lights on. With much of the oil and gas supply from the Middle East cut off, many are looking for alternatives, saying that safety concerns about nuclear plants and environmental worries about coal are secondary to immediate economic needs. Others want to accelerate the production of renewables like solar and wind. Can production be ramped up quickly? And can the world reduce its dependence on oil and gas? We'll discuss all this with our panel of guests, but first, we have Fintan Monaghan's report.
20% of the world's oil and gas once passed through the Strait of Hormuz. But fear of Iranian attacks has effectively closed the vital route to most ships. Many production facilities in the Gulf have stopped operations. For many countries, the search is now on for ways to make up the shortfall. This can mean alternative sources of oil and gas. Some are looking for renewables, while for others, immediate energy needs might be met by coal.
Currently, adequate coal stocks are available at all power plants across the country. India has broken the record for the second consecutive time with 1 billion tons worth of coal production.
India, Vietnam, and Thailand are among those firing up coal plants to fill the gap. More than 80% of oil and gas that passed through Hormuz went to Asian markets. Many had invested in LNG as a cleaner, reliable alternative to coal. But the crisis in the Gulf has called that reliability into question. Others are sticking with natural gas, but need to source it from elsewhere. Taiwan relies on LNG for around half of its power needs, and most of it is imported. It's now looking to get its LNG from another supplier. The United States currently provides around 10% of Taiwan's needs. That's now set to increase to as much as 20% in the next 3 years. The US was already ramping up production before the crisis. It produces more than enough oil and gas to fill its own needs, and is now well placed to export and capture market share abroad. The Trump administration has already steered away from alternatives. It's moved to cancel multiple offshore wind projects, and even agreed to pay French company Total Energies $1 billion to abandon their wind farms and instead invest in fossil fuels.
With this agreement, we're allowing this great company to redirect those dollars that have been paid into the Treasury towards affordable, reliable, and secure oil and natural gas production.
But others see renewables as an opportunity. Often framed as a response to climate change, it's now increasingly being pitched as the smart security option at a time of global energy disruptions.
Our addiction to fossil fuels is destabilizing both the climate and global security. Now more than ever, we must accelerate the just transition to renewable energy. Renewables deliver climate security, energy security, and national security.
The European Union has set a target of net zero emissions by 2050 and has invested heavily in renewable energy. It imports nearly all its oil and gas. The crisis in the Gulf has exposed this as a vulnerability and may accelerate the transition. But different member states have different levels of exposure. Italy relies on fossil fuels for 75% of its energy needs, among the highest in Europe. This makes the economy sensitive to sudden spikes in the global price of LNG and oil. Meanwhile, France is among the most insulated from global energy shocks. Nuclear power provides 70% of its energy mix, with renewables generating more than 20%. It's unclear how long the disruption to global energy supplies will go on, but the crisis may influence global energy policy well beyond the current crisis. Fintan Monaghan, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
African nations have also been pursuing alternatives to oil and natural gas. South Africa relies heavily on coal. It provides more than 80% of the country's power, but that's also made it the world's 15th biggest producer of carbon emissions. Many countries are investing in solar power. North Africa has some of the highest levels of solar radiation in the world, along with large stretches of undeveloped land. 2025 saw capacity across the continent expand by a record 4.5 gigawatts. A number of African states are pursuing nuclear power, including Egypt, Kenya, and Ghana. But to date, South Africa is the only country with a nuclear power plant, and that was built in the 1980s. Let's dive deeper into this. Joining us from Paramaribo in Suriname is NJ Ayuk. He's the executive chairman of the Africa Energy Chamber. In Bangkok, we have Peter Kiernan. He's an independent energy transition analyst focusing on Asia, and in London, Patrick Galley. He is the head of investigations at Global Witness, who leads energy and fossil fuel cases. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Well, to you first of all, Patrick, just how are things? What is the situation now?
Thanks, Rishad. I would say the recent violence and price volatility we're seeing is a reminder of how important it is for the world to get its energy transition correct, not just in terms of the long-term health of people and the planet, but also in the name of peace and stability and affordability. No one anywhere, I don't believe, wants their energy bills or food costs to be at the mercy of geopolitics or invasions. And renewables are already cheaper than fossil fuels in more than 90% of projects commissioned. They are more efficient by energy return on investment. They are more popular. And so I would encourage governments to view this crisis as an opportunity to learn the right lessons from our global energy supply, which we are seeing yet again. As long as we remain heavily reliant on imported fossil fuels, our economic well-being will always be, to a certain extent, starved. There will be an asterisk to it. It will always be hitched to events that are quite often outside of our control. And I would say that the renewable transition is something that's happening at scale around the world due to economics, due to scalability, due to cost. but it's something that really needs further support from leaders and policymakers, and it needs further public investment that was promised by rich nations many years ago to then encourage the private support. So it's an opportunity, of course, but it does depend on what lessons policymakers take from it.
Well, indeed, many versions of Chinese don't include the word crisis. They use the word opportunity. So certainly that is one thing. NJ, with the same question in mind, but with specifically more on Africa.
I think we find ourselves in Africa in a war that we didn't start, we didn't create. It's not our war, but we've seen the effects. Long lines in petroleum gas stations in Nairobi, or even in Kampala, but also some countries that rely a lot, maybe about 80–90% of their power generation is coming out of oil or natural gas. They're starting to see load shedding. Take, for example, South Sudan. But also, I have to disagree with Patrick on this. This is not a war created by fossil fuels or oil and gas. I think Patrick should get his facts right. The other thing you have to really pay attention to this is that whether you want to transition to renewables, which we don't disagree with, we just believe that, in a sense, Africa has its right to use its resources to get its people out of energy poverty. 600 million Africans today don't have access to electricity. 1 billion no access to clean cooking. This war is creating a problem, but the answer is not to go on a fast-track transition that does not really take into consideration our people and industrialization. Right now, we're seeing austerity with African government because of this crisis. We also seen a lot of countries have to figure out if they have to subsidize petroleum products or if they have to get it from the straight from other sources. It is indeed a dire situation what we face in Africa.
I'm sure Patrick will address some of that later on, but certainly, Peter, of course, perhaps Asia is the most exposed in many ways. The countries like China have to import 80% plus of their energy needs. So what is the situation like that? And do they have more wiggle room to pivot towards renewables?
Yes, I think with the Asian region and Southeast Asia in particular, you could say that this region is acutely exposed to the current crisis in the Persian Gulf. That is because of its not just its high level of dependence on fossil fuel imports, namely oil and gas, but also on the share of that does come from the Persian Gulf region. So this does represent something of a crisis for many of these fast-growing large economies, given that high rate of dependence on imports. Very few countries in the region are self-sufficient or net exporters of, say, oil and gas. So there is a high level of import dependence from the Middle East. So this is why this crisis has been acutely felt, not just in terms of price, but eventually in terms of security of supply. I would agree, I guess, that when there's a crisis, there is also an opportunity. The opportunity is for many of these economies to accelerate the energy transition that they have been undergoing already. This can be justified not just in terms of energy security grounds and also for tackling climate change, which also presents security problems itself, but also in terms of economic security. So while there might be some short-term fixes, such as some countries are deciding to ramp up coal-fired power output, in the longer term, there needs to be a look at the balance in terms of the energy mix of plenty of these countries. And with the cheapening technologies of renewables, batteries, and also use of EVs, these things need to be looked at in terms of more durable solutions for the longer term.
Patrick, your environmental credentials are, of course, they're evidenced by the cycle behind you. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission chief, said that turning away from nuclear was a strategic error. Was it?
If you look at France, where I lived for many years, they derive much of their electricity from nuclear. Now that it obviously comes with its own problems in terms of environmental concerns, but it is lower carbon than more traditional fossil fuels. Nuclear is quite expensive, I will say. In the country where I am now, the UK, we are spending billions on foreign contracts to renew to some extent, but also expand our nuclear fleet. And that is a cost tail that runs into the decades. Nuclear reactors, okay, there's some talk about small nuclear reactors, although they're really only in the design phase still. Nuclear reactors tend to need to be enormous to justify the cost investment. That sort of incentivizes governments to keep them online over a multi-decadal period. And, you know, whilst I'm not necessarily constitutionally against using all the weapons we have in the fight against climate change, I'm not convinced that nuclear is the single greatest option. I would say where we are currently in 2026, we need to think about this from a perspective of the just transition in our energy systems. We need to think about what's best economically, what's best for the climate, of course, but also we need to approach it with equity and fairness and recognize varying historical responsibilities and current capacity to respond. And cost-wise, if we're looking about scaling up energy sources to try and do many things, mitigate climate change, to ease the burden on people's wallets, to improve energy resilience to external shocks, and to help stabilize domestic prices, cost-wise, renewables make a lot more sense than nuclear.
NJ, the thing is, there's 5 African countries which have nuclear programs. Only one has actually built a reactor, and that's, of course, South Africa, as we mentioned earlier. So for many, it's just simply not an option. But what kind of energy shortfall is it that really at the moment has to be addressed? And is there spare capacity to actually meet that demand and supply shortfall?
Absolutely. If there is a continent that needs more energy, not less energy, it is the African continent. I just mentioned we have 600 to 700 million without access to electricity, 900 without clean cooking technology, 1 million people die every year because of indoor pollutions. Our greenhouse gas emissions are less than 3%. If you use all of Africa's natural gas, if you produce that, greenhouse gas emissions don't go up by more than 0.62%. Nuclear is an option. I think if you have safe nuclear use, that is very good. We've seen in Europe, countries that have abandoned nuclear decommission plant are buying electricity from France that kept nuclear. So what we don't want is to make the mistake the Europeans are making. And the other part you're looking at is that even with gas, the UK is decommissioning gas fields in the North Sea. But guess what? Norway is the drill baby drill capital of Europe, and nobody's complaining about that because they're producing that. We have to first pay attention to energy security, and nuclear energy offers that energy security that Africa needs, and it's going to expand. It's very expensive. Let's not kid about it. But you're going to have SMR, small modular reactors that is going to go in countries like Ghana, like Kenya, and even in Egypt. Base load is key for Africa, not just having wind turbines and solar panels. We want energy for industrialization, so our kids don't have to cross the Mediterranean to look for jobs on European streets.
Patrick, now, what is this all likely to do to the carbon trading market and also, plans for net zero?
Plans for net zero are already being scaled back, either on an institutional basis, as you see with some of the big producers, or on a country basis, as you see with the United States. Emissions have increased every year since the Paris Agreement in 2015, apart from when we had a global pandemic. This, to me, suggests that the route that governments are taking to interpret the concept of net zero is dangerously misguided. Net zero really is only as effective to the climate as the size of the net. And what you see is a lot of mature economies who are historically responsible for the vast majority of historical emissions, i.e. they contributed most to the problem, are the ones who are advocating for the largest possible net. That is, we continue as business as usual for many, many years, and then at some point in the 2040s, we scale out technology that is still really only locally available, such as carbon capture, such as land-based solutions, to try and suck all of this carbon back in and mitigate it. The problem, of course, with that is that climate change is as much a stock problem as it is a flow. By that I mean, even if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases, and I'll remind viewers that greenhouse gases are increasing every year, even if we stopped producing them tomorrow, the carbon still sits in the atmosphere. So the impact of this crisis, I would hope that historic rich emitters such as the EU stop and think, how much longer are we going to put up with a system of importing fossil fuels at large cost? And remember, the EU spent billions, hundreds of billions of dollars post-Ukraine to reroute its energy supplies from Russia. At what point are we actually going to take responsibility for our contribution to the crisis, the UK included, and the US especially? And sit down and say, well, no, not just from an economic perspective in terms of price shocks, in terms of sustainable development and trying to ward off the worst impacts of climate change, which, yes, Europe and the EU has largely contributed to, but the effects will be felt elsewhere and more severely in the global majority countries. And at what point are we going to sit down and take responsibility and say, we need to be leading on this. We need to show the world, as we showed the world for 150 years, you can exploit your natural resources or the resources of other countries that you invade or take over. That is not an equitable, fair or sustainable way of running the global economy. And really, it's incumbent upon European and US and global minority countries to not just show they're willing, but to put their money where their mouth is and to provide all other countries that are quite justifiably trying to increase prosperity and equity within their own communities and their own economies, to help assist them do that. And that requires money. But I will say the just transition is an investment. It's precisely that. It's not just a cost that is one and done and no one ever gets any benefits from it again. Okay? The short-term costs are going to be large. That is unavoidable. But the long-term benefits, these are investments that hopefully future generations will thank our leaders for today if they take the right decisions based off of this crisis.
NJ, so the question is, what sort of a hit, an economic hit, is Africa likely to have? And what's the best way forward? I mean, it's going to be really region by region, country by country too.
The best way forward for Africa, as we see it, is drill, baby, drill. We have to produce every drop of hydrocarbons we find to get our people out of poverty. I wrote a book on it's called Just Transition, Making Energy Poverty History with an energy mix, bestseller in the US. One of the key things we realized with that project was we are looking at fossil fuels and especially natural gas that has driven human flourishing. It has really gotten wealthy nations very wealthy. If extended life expectancy, they have industrialized, and now they're telling us to decarbonize. What's in Africa to decarbonize? You can't decarbonize what is not carbonized. The wealthy nations need to decarbonize. African nations need to industrialize. The problem with this whole stuff is that most of the promise that have been made to poor nations, African nations, 100 billion they promise for every year on through their COP and the Kyotos, that never happened. So you can't have people keep waiting on broken promises and waiting for some white knight that is going to come save them. That's not going to happen. That's why at this moment we're saying, leave us alone. Let us use our resources to get out of poverty. If we have to use coal to get people energy security, then we do. If we have to use natural gas, then we do. Right now, the biggest natural gas users are not African countries. Our natural gas is being exported to these same countries that are telling us that we shouldn't use natural gas. So what are you telling us? We stay poor while they get richer, and at the same time, you're using our resources to industrialize, and our only shot is to beg for aid. We just believe there is dignity in work, and we cannot rely on aid every day. So our future, I must tell you, is going to be around drill, baby, drill. And African nations are going to produce that because of the broken promises they've had from wealthy nations for a long time. And we don't have any way out. We just don't. And when wealthy nations have a recession, we have a depression. And we have to ensure that we get our people out of that and again out of austerity that we see a lot of governments right now in Africa.
With that in mind, Peter, I mean, should Asia really also be following the same path? Drill, baby, drill, or mine coal, if you will. I mean, in the case of perhaps Japan, it's a different story with 33 operable nuclear plants and only half of them actually online. They have a different set of fish to fry.
Well, I think in each country the situation is different. It's just a question of, are those resources there, and will that be enough to pick up any slack? And in most cases, it just isn't there. That is why many large Southeast Asian economies are so heavily dependent on oil, gas, and coal imports, with a few exceptions. So as far as ASEAN is concerned, every ASEAN member state is oil dependent, I think, except perhaps Brunei. As a region, ASEAN will be gas import dependent within a few years. There may be attempts to find new sources of domestic supply within the territories of those countries, but basically the solution is much more effective if it's seen as a demand side solution, and the technologies are there. I mean, just as a precedent, if you go back in time a bit and you look at the oil price crisis of the 1970s, the response to that in European economies and Japan and the US was to get out of oil-fired power generation, and that was actually displaced mainly by nuclear. But it was that external shock which represented a significant change in the way of thinking about not just supply but also demand. I think given the fact that the world is facing yet another external shock in the form of what's happening in the Middle East today, add that to what happened 4 years ago with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think in most cases it's time to have a reset in our way of thinking. And I think the energy transition, while there may not be a one-size-fits-all solution, but in terms of the energy transition, it doesn't have to just be supported, or the narrative doesn't just have to revolve around fighting climate change. It also has very tangible energy security and economic security benefits as well. And I think that can be applied in many cases in the Asia-Pacific region.
Patrick, given what NJ said and what Peter said, I mean, is it a situation of a reset in the case of Africa? Is it the right policy to go back in order to move forward, as it were?
I think what the right policy is up for countries to decide themselves. And I would go back to the world's plan to mitigate the worst excesses of climate change, which is the UNFCCC, the UN-led climate change process under the Paris Agreement and subsequent COPs. This principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, the idea that we are all to some extent going to be impacted, and already indeed are, and already are losing. Many countries in the global majority are losing their land, their livelihoods, because of the pollution that the global minority historically has produced. And therefore, the EU, the US, the UK have a economic moral responsibility to help fix the problem, essentially. And locally, yes, it might well be easier to ramp up coal production if it exists, or to tap into local hydrocarbon deposits. That's for people and policymakers to decide. It's not for me to say. What I will say is that there are lots of things that we can apply to this that aren't really being done and have been designed and should be thought of, including subsidies reform. So oil and gas is only really affordable in lots of markets around the world, and affordable obviously is on a sliding scale given what we're seeing now with oil at $110 a barrel. But subsidies given over to fossil fuels are enormous, and these can be reoriented towards other energy sources. In terms of building out the energy transition, we need to build a lot of the infrastructure that doesn't exist yet, right? Okay, we're going to need lots and lots of solar panels, of substations, of battery storage, of wind turbines, etc. And that's going to require actual natural resource discovery and exploration, and therefore we need governance around equitable access to that and fair share of the communities. But what I will say that the money is there for this to be done in an equitable and sustainable manner. The EU spent on rerouting its fossil fuel supply post-Ukraine. It spent 60% of what is needed to electrify the entire bloc, i.e. the world's biggest single market. So these are choices that policymakers can make, but I've not seen them make them fast enough yet.
NJ Ayuk, Peter Kernan, Patrick Galley, thank you so much for joining us. And that's it for this show. Get in touch with us on X at Rashad TV and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. There's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. Well, that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Rashad Salamat from the whole team in Doha. Thank you for joining us. Al Jazeera's coverage of the war in the Middle East continues in just a moment.
This is America, with Al Jazeera's exclusive interview with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
What are your main demands?
The Iranian regime can never have nuclear weapons.
The Iranian regime is able to take a lot of pain.
What's worse than having no off-ramp? Having no allies.
NATO has done absolutely nothing.
This sound and that sight have become the new normal across the Gulf.
This is America, every weekday on Al Jazeera.
That would precipitate an attack against American forces.
To prevent Iran from getting nukes.
There is no coherent strategy, and you can see that's reflected in the media coverage.
Many American media see it like a video game. From the graphics on the screen to who they speak to, war for them is big business.
We saw this exact same pattern happen in Gaza, the same lazy, flattened reporting that we saw in Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera.
I'm Riley Carlson, and this is Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. Coming up, as the war on Iran rages on, the U.S. Defense Secretary has asked the Army Chief of Staff to step down. General Randy George leaves the post immediately. The U.S. president threatens to strike Iran's electric power plants after posting a video showing the destruction of a bridge. The rush to fill up the tank in Pakistan. The government hikes up petrol and diesel prices due to the war. And we look at how the war on Iran could determine President Trump's legacy and the United States' position as a global superpower.
And later on, This is America. What would a U.S. exit from the war mean for the Strait of Hormuz? We'll look at America's obligations as a major power and its impact on global energy supplies.
Thank you for joining us. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has asked the Army's Chief of Staff to step down. The Pentagon says General Randy George ceases his duties with immediate effect. That's as the joint operation with Israel against Iran enters the second month. After President Donald Trump vowed to hit Iran extremely hard, attacks west of Tehran brought down a bridge described as the tallest in the Middle East. State media say at least 8 people were killed and 95 injured. Tehran says the attacks will not compel them to surrender. Senior Iranian military officials have upped the defiance, saying the Strait of Hormuz remains open to global shipping, but it is closed to, quote, enemies of Iran. The warnings leave countries in the region on high alert. Gulf leaders denounced Iranian attacks at a UN Security Council meeting, demanding that all maritime waterways stay open.
The GCC also calls on the Security Council to take all necessary measures to do the following:
First, immediately halt Iranian attacks against GCC states. Second, protect maritime corridors and guarantee uninterrupted maritime navigation through all strategic waterways, taking all necessary means to achieve that. Third, include GCC states in any discussions and agreements with Iran to enhance the general security and prevent further escalation or the repetition of such attacks in the future.
We have correspondents covering the latest developments from Tehran, here in Doha, Singapore, and Washington, D.C., and that is where we will begin with Rosalind Jordan. Rosalind, the president has posted quite dramatic video of this civilian bridge being blown up, and now he's also added on to that another threat. What can you tell us about this?
The U.S. President Donald Trump, on his personal social media account, has basically threatened the Iranian government with continued military strikes, including on civilian infrastructure, in particular electricity producing facilities. That, if it happened, would be considered a war crime under the international law of war. The president has already threatened the Iranian government with future military attacks if they do not agree to his administration's 15-point proposal for ending the war on Iran, which started on February 28th.
And Rosalind, I want to ask you as well about the Army Chief of Staff being asked to step down. What's the timing of this? Why now?
That's a very good question. There's a lot of speculation in the military press here in Washington about why General Randy George was relieved not only of his command, but is resigning his military career after nearly 38 years in the position, serving in the U.S. military. The speculation, again, from the military press is that either he and the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, were not seeing eye to eye on the promotions of 4 colonels to generals, reportedly because Hegseth either had a problem with the gender of those who were being put forward for promotion or with a problem with their race. Again, speculation. There's also speculation in the military press that General George was perhaps on the wrong side of Pete Hegseth because he had at one point been a close advisor to Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary during the Biden administration. And the Hegseth group at the Pentagon has been trying to remove many top generals and admirals whom they felt were too closely allied with the previous administration. But again, this is all speculation. All the Pentagon would say in a brief statement is that General George is leaving his position, he is ending his military career, and that the Pentagon is thanking him for his service.
All right, Rosalind Jordan reporting live for us from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Rosalind. Let's go to Mohammed Val now, who joins us live from Tehran. Mohammed, we've had just in the past few minutes this new Truth Social from President Trump threatening once again electric energy infrastructure in Tehran. How is this going to be taken by officials there?
President Trump has given a deadline for that, which is the 6th of April. That's about 4 days from now. And the Iranians are taking it seriously, particularly the leaders here are taking that threat very seriously because they have seen it even being done on the ground since last week. We have seen a lot of power facilities, blackouts because of power facilities that have been struck around Tehran and also in Karaj. So that threat is already being executed at a certain degree, and they are expecting more of it. But they are saying that no matter how many civilian facilities are destroyed, they will be rebuilt. But what can't be rebuilt is America's standing, because they consider this an act of, this is considered a terrorist attack against civilians and also war crimes committed against the Iranian people. They understand that these strikes and these threats are meant to coerce Iranians and force them to a negotiation table to strike a deal with the Americans, something the Iranians have been refusing from day one. They said there is no negotiation, there is no intention for negotiations because they don't trust the other side. And they have seen how during negotiations, twice before, war has been launched against Iran, and they're not going to step in that trap again. So Iranians are focusing on their military defense and the strikes that they wage against the other side in Israel and other parts of the region. And they think this is the only course of action until they gain victory in this war. They don't pin any hope on either promises of reconciliation or agreement, and they don't also show any fear in the face of threats.
Mohammed, while you're speaking, we're looking at pictures of this bridge in Karaj that was blown up today. Iranian state TV is saying that the attack on that bridge was a double tap strike. What else are they saying happened there?
Yes, that has been confirmed by the authorities here, and they describe it as a terrorist act and an Al-Qaeda style type of strike, the second strike, because it was not expected by the civilians, especially by the rescue workers who rushed to the place to help those who were wounded and also remove the bodies from under the rubble. And also remember, this bridge is still under construction, and the Iranians were celebrating Nature Day when the strike happened. Some of the families were out there around the place enjoying their time, springtime, and also having picnics there. And that's why many civilians have been either killed or wounded. So there is a lot of condemnation against this act of aggression by the Americans. A lot of condemnation here, and we have the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi making a special comment on that, saying that striking civilian structures, including unfinished bridges, will not compel Iranians to surrender. It only conveys the defeat and moral collapse of an enemy in disarray. Every bridge and building will be built back stronger. What will never recover damage to America's standing. So, I mean, a response that contains a lot of defiance and against the hopes of the Americans that such strikes will force Iranians to the negotiation table.
All right, Mohammed Val reporting live in Tehran. Thank you, Mohammed. Let's bring in Victoria Gatenby now. She's live for us here in Doha, Victoria, because the IRGC is talking about targeting IT centers and bridges in retaliation, which is of some concern for this area, which has been getting a lot of those retaliatory strikes. What are they saying?
Well, Iranian media reporting that the IRGC does plan to extend its attacks on infrastructure in GCC countries and also American IT firms. Now, there have been conflicting reports about how successful any such attacks have been. The IRGC, in the last 24 hours, claimed to have attacked an Oracle data hub in Dubai. Now, that has been flatly denied by Dubai's media organization, who say that that is false and has been fabricated. We also know that the IRGC have claimed that they have attacked in Kuwait, Bahrain, that they have attacked an Amazon cloud facility. Now, the Interior Ministry of Bahrain has confirmed that some kind of facility has been attacked. Certainly the Financial Times is reporting that that is an Amazon cloud facility. No confirmation from Amazon at the moment. And in terms of infrastructure across this region, well, Iranian media is reporting that they have published a list of 10 bridges which they say are going to be potentially attacked because the bridge in Iran was attacked on Thursday. These are strategically important bridges across this region, and they include, for example, Sheikh Jabba Causeway in Kuwait City, which is one of the biggest causeways, and also the Sheikh Zayed Bridge, which links the island of Abu Dhabi to the mainland.
All right, and Victoria, the Gulf countries, of course, want to see an end to these strikes. Once again, they're taking their concerns to the UN. Can you walk us through the 3 demands that they presented there today?
Yeah, so the first demand was that they want the UN Security Council to do all it can to facilitate the end of these attacks on GCC countries. They have been saying this from day one, that they want Iran to immediately stop attacking their neighbors. The second demand was that they want the UN Security Council to facilitate the free passage through crucial waterways, namely the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is under threat from the Houthis, which are an ally of Iran. So they want the UN to do what it can do there. The GCC saying they are opposed to Iran's claims that they will permanently closed to certain vessels that are flagged with a US flag or an Israeli flag, that strait of water, which is crucial for the free flow of energy. GCC countries also opposed to Iran's suggestion that vessels might have to pay a fee to get through that strait. And the third demand really was that GCC countries say they've been really hit hard by this conflict. They have, they've had 85% of all projectiles that Iran has fired targeted towards this region. That's about 6,000 projectiles. So they say when there is a negotiated settlement, some kind of settlement between the US, Israel, and Iran, they want a seat at that table and they want their concerns to be reflected in any ultimate settlement that is decided.
All right, Victoria Gatenby live in Doha. Thank you, Victoria. Reports that Oman and Iran are drafting a protocol to monitor traffic through the Strait of Hormuz had led to some markets in Asia opening slightly higher. South Korea's main Kospi index rose by nearly 3% an hour after opening. The price of crude oil is trading at around $110 a barrel. That's the highest it's been in 4 years. The Philippines says it's held positive and productive talks with Iran to allow oil shipments to pass safely through the strait. Let's bring in Patrick Falk now, who joins us live from Singapore. Patrick, there is no sign of a resolution to this crisis, but markets in Asia still appear to be finding some support in this news. Is that where it's coming from?
Yeah, that's right. Something really interesting happening here. As you say, no indication of any sort of resolution nearing. And in fact, in the last 24 hours, President Trump has escalated his threats against Iran. We're also seeing energy prices rise. Brent crude, as you mentioned a moment ago, up around 8%, trading around $110 a barrel. And yet we are seeing markets reverse some of yesterday's sharp losses. There are several regions that are closed for the long Easter weekend, but the main markets that have been affected by the energy supply disruptions are advancing. So as you say, South Korea's Kospi up around 3% of the open, Japan's Nikkei 225 up around 1.5%. It is really notable to see all of this, and all of it is being driven, as it seems, by these talks that have taken place between Iran and Oman, and reports saying that they are drafting a proposal to monitor traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And so that's alleviating some of the concerns about energy supply disruptions. It's really interesting in particular because, it says a lot about this how markets are being driven, more about the supply concerns about energy and traffic through the Strait of Hormuz than the crisis itself and the war between Iran and the US. So how long this is going to last remains to be seen. What it means in practice is hard to say, but for now, it's certainly lifting the mood among investors.
Patrick, I want to ask you something else about what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has agreed to allow Philippine ships and seafarers pass through the strait. How big of a development is that? And do we know any of the details at this point?
Well, it's a major development, certainly for the Philippines and arguably for other parts of this region as well. The Philippines had been reaching out to Iran for some time for talks. It wanted specifically to be designated as a non-hostile state. Those talks have taken place now, and the Philippine Foreign Minister, Teresa Lazaro, said that they were productive and positive, and her Iranian counterpart had agreed that the country would allow the safe, unhindered and expeditious passage of Philippine-flagged vessels, energy supplies, as well as the safe passage of Philippine seafarers through the Strait of Hormuz. Remember, a lot of Filipino nationals are operating a lot of these tankers that are sailing through the waterway. So it is a really significant development, and Philippines has been one of the countries most hard hit by the energy crisis. Its supplies are dwindling. As we understood just a few days ago, it was down to around just a few weeks left of oil supplies. So this is a major development. Notably, over the last few days, the situation has been so desperate that it had to procure 2.5 million barrels of oil from Russia. It said because of exceptional circumstances, it had no choice.
Yeah, several countries feeling that pinch. Patrick Falk, live in Singapore. Thank you so much. The U.S. and Israel's war with Iran continues to disrupt global oil supplies. Pakistan has now said it will raise prices for diesel by nearly 55%. Petrol will rise by nearly 40%. Osama bin Javed is in Karachi, where he's been speaking to people about the price hikes.
Well, anger and frustration, if I can summarize it in 2 words. We've been speaking to people in the last half hour when these prices were announced, and it was that frenzy of queues. They've just cleared up behind me. And there's a number of people who we've been speaking to who tell us that this is a situation where they have not been able to plan for. People were frustrated, saying that this is a country which has been able to continue to get the fuel supplies from the Strait of Hormuz, and they cannot understand why the government is reducing those subsidies. The government of Pakistan says that it has been providing about $500 million, give or take, in the last 4 weeks as subsidy. With us is Mehtab, who's a student. We were just speaking to him a moment ago. Mehtab, what is your reaction about this price hike? What do you think?
It's the worst part of life. So if you earn monthly 15 to 20,000, so how you can survive?
But they're going to give you 2,000 rupees a month in subsidy still.
Worst part of life. Worst.
Why?
458 petrol and diesel rises every day, and usually high octane is rises. So how you survive? If you earn 15 to 20,000 month, so how you survive?
Thank you very much. Well, that's one view, and that is kind of the resounding view here, where people have been coming to fuel stations, talking to the petrol, the people who were here, the station owners. There were some fisticuffs here as well. People were angry, but essentially this is what people were expecting as what will happen if the prices continue to rise. Pakistan's government says it is facing a financial crunch. It cannot continue to give unlimited subsidies, and it has to pass on the rising fuel costs to the consumer. We've been speaking to officials here who tell us Pakistan only has about 20 to 24 days of supplies for fuel that is left in the country. And unless the government does something drastic, unless the war stops, unless there is renewed vigor in making sure those supply lines continue, these prices are continuing to go up. And that is the fear here in Karachi at the moment, as the new fuel prices have just come into effect.
The UK has convened a virtual meeting of representatives from more than 40 countries to discuss fully opening the Strait of Hormuz. The talks focused on how to use political and diplomatic means to remove restrictions in the vital waterway. But the US was not among the countries in attendance. Rory Challens has more from London.
No fleets of black limos outside the Foreign Office in London. So hastily was this summit organised that the 40 or so foreign ministers joining Yvette Cooper did so by video call. The remit: to find viable political and diplomatic measures to get the Straits of Hormuz moving. Though here's the important part: explicitly after the fighting has finished. There is no appetite for getting involved in Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu's war, despite the criticism that there has been of Iran's behavior.
Iran's reckless strikes are attacking international shipping, seeking to hijack the global economy. That's affecting petrol prices and mortgage rates here in the UK, but also jet fuel across the world, fertilizer to Africa, and also gas to Asia. So countries across the world being impacted, and that's why we're so determined to see every possible diplomatic, economic, and coordinated measure to get the Straits reopened.
Though concrete steps to open the Straits of Hormuz will be hard to navigate, the political and diplomatic focus of these talks suggests that most countries are still unprepared to put their military hardware into harm's way, though the British Ministry of Defence is gathering another meeting next week of many of the same players. Donald Trump has washed his hands of US responsibility for opening the Straits and says it will be easy, though the countries gathered on Thursday are far from sure of that. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera in London.
Iranian missile attacks have continued on Israel. While the Israeli military says it's intercepted the majority, some are making it through. A ballistic missile hit Petah Tikva in central Israel on Thursday evening, bypassing air defense systems. It landed between a residential neighborhood and the city's industrial zone, causing a large crater. The shockwaves heavily damaged nearby buildings. Health officials in Lebanon say at least 4 people have been killed in an Israeli attack in the south. The Israeli army says it's targeting Hezbollah. In response, more than 100 rockets have been fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel since Thursday morning. A kindergarten in the north was reportedly hit by rocket shrapnel. The Lebanese health ministry says more than 1,300 people have been killed since Israel resumed its attacks on Lebanon last month. The situation is dire for more than 1 million people who have been displaced.
I don't see anything ahead of me now. All I see is how to keep my children safe and provide for their needs during the day. I'm living one day at a time now, checking on the children, my father, my sister, the family, what they lack. Maybe we won't return. Maybe we will be martyred, or maybe God will allow us to go back. Only God knows. But telling me to think about the future? In war, you can't think about the future.
Iranians are marking the end of the Persian New Year holiday at a time when festivities were overshadowed by war. Known as the Day of Nature, families gathered outdoors to participate in a tradition that they say lifts their spirits and keeps them holding on. Tawhid Asadi reports from Tehran.
Today marks Sizdeh Bedar, or Day of Nature in Iran, a day when many families traditionally leave their homes to spend time outdoors, marking the end of Persian New Year or Nowruz holidays. Sizdeh Bedar is traditionally spent in nature, with people casting away the sabzeh or sprouted greens, symbolizing a fresh start. But this year, it feels quite different. For the first time in decades, the country observes this day under a war which started more than a month ago. The sense of uncertainty is hard to ignore. Still, some have come out, seeking a moment of normalcy in the middle of a crisis. A moment to step outside, not just into nature, but briefly away from the constant tension.
It was so cool and great. Even though it's a wartime condition and we heard explosion sounds half an hour ago, people are okay and nobody is afraid. They are enjoying their time.
It's not like every year. People were sad because of the martyrs, both from the armed forces and ordinary people whose homes were targeted by missiles.
Although many lack peace of mind and there's constant stress that something could happen at any moment, we still have to carry on with our normal lives, hoping for better days ahead.
Given the wartime conditions and the loved ones we've lost, no one is truly well. Still, on this day, we keep the tradition and go out for the sake of our families, hoping it lifts our spirits.
Our history has repeatedly experienced such hardships, but we must not lose our ancient and cultural heritage, and Sizdeh Bedar is one of the traditions we must preserve.
For the families here, Sizdeh Bedar is no longer just about tradition. It's about holding on to routine, to each other, and to small moments of normal life as the war goes on. Tawhid Asadi, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Barbara Slavin is a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center. She says it's unlikely Trump will achieve any of his goals with a ground operation in Iran.
There's no love lost in this country for Iran, but the war on Iran has never had majority support. It was never properly explained. We are 4 or 5 weeks into it, and this is the first time that the President of the United States gave a speech trying to lay out his goals. It didn't go very well. I was looking at some accounts among Republican political strategists who were very disappointed with the speech and scratching their heads afterward, asking, what was this supposed to accomplish? Again, it was a kind of hodgepodge of excuses, reasons, rationales for the war without a clear strategy to achieve really any of these aims. I sincerely hope we will not see a ground operation. I think that would be very high risk. And I know that there have been members of the military cautioning the administration. Certainly, we hear a lot of retired members of the military on all the cable news channels cautioning the administration not to mount any kind of ground operation. But the troops are there if the president decides he wants to have some sort of final commando operation, perhaps trying to seize Karg Island or some of the nuclear material that remains in Iran. We're not out of this yet, and clearly Donald Trump thinks he's achieving something by continuing the war.
Let's take a look at some of the day's other news now. U.S. President Donald Trump has removed Pam Bondi from her position as Attorney General. Bondi has been under pressure for her handling of the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. It's the second senior dismissal after Kristi Noem was removed from her post in the Department of Homeland Security in March. Our chief U.S. correspondent Alan Fisher has more from Washington.
She wasn't his first pick for Attorney General.
Such a nice person.
But Pam Bondi was always a Trump loyalist. One of the first cabinet members confirmed by the Senate she was a MAGA favorite, mainly because of her stated commitment to release all the Jeffrey Epstein files, the FBI investigation into the notorious child sex trafficker with high-profile links. She told Friendly Media his client list was on her desk. She was prepared to release it. But in July last year, the FBI, which comes under Bondi's control, admitted there was no list. That was a strike against her. When questioned about it in Congress, she said it should be more interested in the economy than Epstein.
The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000. You sit here and you attack the president, and I am not going to have it. I'm not going to put up with it.
In his first term, Trump raged against his attorneys general. Meant to be independent, he wanted someone who would pursue his enemies. He made it clear what was required when he posted what was meant to be a private message to Bondi, demanding action against his perceived enemies. She pushed a case against former FBI Director James Comey. It fell apart. That was another strike against her. Trump liked Bondi personally, loved she was combative in his defense.
Have you apologized to President Trump? Have you apologized to President Trump, all of you who participated in those impeachment hearings against Donald Trump? You all should be apologizing.
You're a big fan of Elvis, Pam.
My mother was.
She traveled with him a lot, and he often publicly praised the job she was doing.
Pam Bondi has done a fantastic job. And Pam, would you say a few words, please?
Thank you, President Trump, and thank you for your leadership. And this is all about collaboration.
But her inability to stop the questions over Epstein, her failure to follow through against the president's perceived enemies, frustrated him. And her departure is the latest but biggest upheaval at the Justice Department in Trump's second term. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Washington.
An armed group attack in the northeastern Democratic Republic of Congo has killed at least 70 people. Security officials say fighters from the ADF rebel group stormed a village, opening fire and attacking people with machetes. The group also burned most of the homes in the village of Mombasa, forcing people to flee in panic. In Gaza, parents of 3-month-old Jalal say their baby, who was born with a rare skin condition, has died after battling the disease. They pleaded with the relevant authorities for an urgent medical transfer outside the Strip to save his life, but it never happened. Hind Huduri reports from central Gaza.
3 small pimples on Jalal's body were the beginning of the end. His parents thought they were harmless, just a rash on his skin, but in reality, Jalal needed urgent medical evacuation. At just 3 months old, Jalal was diagnosed with pemphigus, a rare autoimmune disease, with no available treatment in Gaza. His body turned blue. His family made repeated trips to Al-Aqsa Hospital, his medical evacuation papers ready, hoping for a chance to save him, but Jalal died.
My son could have received treatment abroad. I know others with the same disease who traveled and are now living healthy lives. What would have happened if the process had been faster? If my child had received treatment in time? He was just a baby.
Jalal's 2-year-old sister Wafa is now also at risk. She still cannot walk or speak. She suffers from hypoxemia and muscle weakness. Most of her time is spent crying for reasons no one can fully understand.
We no longer have the capacity to treat many diseases in Gaza due to severe shortages of medication and medical supplies. The closure of borders and the delay in allowing patients to travel has led to the deaths of many children.
At least 1,400 patients in Gaza have died while waiting for permission to travel abroad for medical treatment. These papers are the only hope for thousands of Palestinians to receive their medical treatment abroad. A very little number made it through the Rafah crossing, but thousands are still waiting. Hind Al-Khudari, Al Jazeera, Al Maghazi refugee camp, Gaza, Palestine.
You're watching Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. Here's a reminder of the main developments this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump has once again warned of destruction to Iranian bridges and electric power plants. In a post on Truth Social, Trump says Iran's new leaders know what has to be done fast. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has vowed to attack bridges across the region in retaliation. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has asked the military's chief of staff to step down. The Pentagon says General Randy George has ceased his duties with immediate effect. His departure comes as the joint operation with Israel against Iran enters a second month. Let's take you to Washington, D.C. now for our regular segment from the U.S. Capitol. This is America.
This is America, and right now, America is weighing how to leave a war without losing control over a vital waterway. What happens if the United States exit Iran before answering critical questions over the Strait of Hormuz? And what is America's obligation as a global power to ensure freedom of navigation? I'll be back later in the show to explore more on that. But first, here's Anna Burns-Francis.
Thanks, Manny. America's entanglement in Iran has left shipments through that strait completely stranded. So who's responsible for reopening the vital waterway? In a moment, we'll be joined by Kimberly Halkett, who is live at the White House today, and Richard Gaisford is live for us in New Jersey. Because America's war with Iran has been going on for more than 30 days now. Last night, the president took to the national stage with an address many expected would shed new light on where he saw the conflict going.
We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
So, no marked change in strategy then, but Donald Trump was also keen to reinforce one of the favourite messages of this administration, economic prosperity.
We built the strongest economy in history. We're going through it right now, the strongest in history.
A lot of other countries might have tuned in to watch that and be wondering what the message was for them. Economies around the world are facing an oil and energy crisis. Across Europe, Asia and the Pacific, countries are counting the days till they run out of fuel. And the countries that supply it are trapped. Tankers with no way out of a strait that's been shut down by Iran as revenge for America's attack. Just a month ago, America was promising any help necessary to get those ships through the strait. No matter what, Trump said, the United States will ensure the free flow of energy to the world. But over time, that message has changed. A couple of weeks later, the president was telling other countries it was their job, then that the strait would reopen naturally at the end of the war. Last night, he said,
The United States imports almost no oil through the Hormuz Strait and won't be taking any in the future. We don't need it. We haven't needed it, and we don't need it.
The US, it appears, has no interest in leading efforts to reopen the strait. But those other countries aren't exactly leaping up to take over. So where does that leave things with one of the most vital waterways in the world? Let's go to our correspondents now. Kimberly Halkett is at the White House and Richard Gaisford joins us from an oil refinery in New Jersey. Kimberly, the president at pains to point out the US doesn't need the strait or its oil, so how does he see it being reopened?
Yeah, that's right, Anna. What we know is that the U.S. president has repeatedly argued that the U.S. is mostly not dependent on oil that flows through the Strait of Hormuz, and that really frames how he thinks it should be reopened. The U.S. president arguing that those that are dependent, primarily Asia, that is the sort of area where the country should come from that should be involved in forming the base of the coalition to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Trump has argued that those nations should, in his words, take the lead. It's clear that his expectation is that the Strait of Hormuz should open without any U.S. action. In fact, he's even suggested that it could automatically open after the conflict does wind down. But of note is the fact that even though the United States is less dependent on oil from the Strait of Hormuz, it is tied to the global oil and financial markets. And as a result, that does affect the United States and U.S. consumers, regardless of what the president might say.
Indeed. Thank you, Kimberly. Let's go to Richard now. Richard, what is the impact of the war and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz having on U.S. energy and oil?
Well, it might be a long way away, but it's exactly the same as the rest of the world. As that crude oil price goes up, it has a knock-on effect to absolutely everything else in the chain. And of course, we're seeing that in the gasoline prices here in America, which are rising quite dramatically. President Trump might say that the U.S. has more crude oil than it needs. He wants to sell it to the rest of the world. That is true, but only of certain types of crude oil. Actually, America needs lots of different types to come into the country to make a wider range of fuel products, and that is what's happening here at the Bayway refinery. It can process very nearly up to 250,000 barrels of crude oil every day, create huge amounts of gasoline. But to do that, it needs to not only take the shale oil that comes in by train from North Dakota, it needs to bring oil in by ship from Canada, sometimes from the North Sea, sometimes from West Africa as well. So you can see this whole business is completely interlinked. It's a completely global industry. That is why the effect is being felt here in America, thousands of miles away from the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East, where, of course, the problem might lie, but it is still America's issue too.
Their equipment's been totally decimated. They have nothing.
Donald Trump's view on the Strait of Hormuz is clear.
What happens to the strait, we're not going to have anything to do with.
In one way, he's right. Very few of the oil tankers and ships currently blocked from passing through this crucial channel will be headed to the US. 20% of the world's oil flows through this narrow sea passage, bordered on one side by Iran. But it's the impact on global oil prices and the knock-on effects to economies around the world that's most definitely of concern to the president, with warnings that if the strait isn't opened, the situation this month will be much worse than last.
The loss of oil in April will be twice the loss of oil in March. I think it will cut the economic growth in many countries, and especially in emerging and developing countries where they don't have the hard currencies, they may be even bigger difficulty. And we may well see, Nikolai, in many countries, the rationing of energy may be coming soon.
Whilst the US is a major producer of crude oil, much of which is exported, it also has to import different types of oil to supplement production at domestic refineries. That means it buys and sells on the global market, with prices spiking due to the conflict. The fact that much of what the US imports comes from near neighbours in Canada and Mexico might help guarantee supply, but it doesn't negate the effects of rising costs worldwide. That means fuel prices are fast going up across the United States, and that is very much the president's problem. Despite still being much lower than elsewhere in the world, the price at the pump here impacts political popularity. In many ways, this is Donald Trump's Suez moment. In 1956, Egypt nationalized the canal that links the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt to regain control. Despite their military success, they were forced to withdraw after pressure from the US and Soviet Union. It weakened their global influence. And maintaining global influence will be key to a president who, despite his mantra of America first, still wants his country to be the leading world power. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, New York.
As President Trump outlines a possible path out of the war with Iran, US media coverage is shifting focus. It's no longer just about how the conflict ends, but whether the US can step away without securing one of the world's most critical waterways. Manny Rapalo looks at how that question is shaping the headlines.
U.S. news outlets are not just asking how this war ends, but whether the U.S. can walk away without controlling the Strait of Hormuz. Let's start with how some outlets are framing the president's exit strategy. Here's the Washington Examiner. Trump lays out exit strategy for Iran war: just pack up and leave. The reporting goes on to say, after considering the various unpalatable options for using military force to take control of the Strait of Hormuz, Trump decided there was no need to do anything. The The strait, he says, will just open up by itself. Let's hop on over to CNN. This was just after President Trump's national address on Wednesday night. Let's take a listen to this exchange.
The other thing here is the Strait of Hormuz. The president seemed to back up and confirm reporting there that he's not interested in the United States having control of it or having that settled if the United States does end this war.
If Iran comes out of this controlling the Strait of Hormuz and being able to meter ships that go through there and taking a cut of every ship, they're going to make hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. So that, if that is the outcome here strategically, that is not good if our objective is to contain Iran.
That reporting captures a growing concern in the U.S. media that exiting this war may not necessarily mean resolving the question over the Strait of Hormuz. And that points to something else very important, a shift from maximum pressure to a message of self-reliance directed toward U.S. allies. This is NPR with the headline, Trump to allies who need access to Strait of Hormuz, go get your own oil. Now let's hop on over to CBS for a bit more of that perspective. Take a listen.
With great respect to our allies, the British, the French, the Japanese, et cetera, that their navies are going to come in here and volunteer to solve this problem in the absence of the United States Navy seems a little fanciful to me.
In other words, U.S. allies may be on their own, which brings us to another theme, the potential end of the United States' historic role as the global protector of freedom of navigation. Let's hop on over to MS Now. This is Mika Brzezinski. Have a listen.
As more than 30 countries will meet virtually today to discuss ways to get heavy traffic moving again through the strait. The meeting will be chaired by the UK's Foreign Secretary. The United States will not attend.
So as the U.S. media continues to track President Trump's exit strategy, the question, again, isn't just over how this war is going to end, but what is going to happen with the Strait of Hormuz. Because if questions over the waterway remain unanswered, the cost may be more than just oil prices, maybe whether or not the U.S. is stepping back from its role of guarantor of global navigation.
In the studio to discuss this crucial issue with us is Tom Davis, a former Republican congressman, and David Hale, former U.S. ambassador and Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. Thank you both for joining me today. Tom, I'll start with you. Is the U.S. responsible for getting the Strait of Hormuz reopened?
Well, I think we bear some responsibility for starting this, with Israel starting this in the first place. That doesn't mean we have to do it all by ourselves. And I think it's going to take a coalition of some kind to get it straight. But sure, we bear some responsibility.
Probably there the answer was not what I was expecting, David, because we have seen clearly a message from the administration that they don't believe that they should be taking the lead in this, at least, and there's no guarantee that they will take part in reopening the strait. How do you see that obligation playing out?
Well, I think there's more than one way to go about this. And what we're seeing with the British initiative that was referenced is that there's a coalition of producers and consumers who are recognizing that it is in their interests to make sure that once the American military operation is over with, that they're doing what they can to keep the straits open at that stage. And so it may be better that the U.S. isn't in the leadership role.
That's actually an interesting point. The problem will be this still has to be in conjunction with the U.S. because there is an ongoing military operation in that area.
Well, the question was, do we bear some responsibility? And the answer is obviously, because we helped start this conflict. Do we need to control it? Do we need to be part of the solution? Do we need to lead? That's entirely different. And I think that we'll see where these negotiations come out and how the continued war effort in Iran goes.
You don't think the U.S. should be leading the effort?
Well, I think we'll be a strong part of it.
Why not lead?
I think let's see what the international crew, if we can get out of it and let somebody else take control over there, more power to them. Why put our ships in harm's way over the next 6 months if we've resolved the Iranian situation?
Okay, do you see an argument there, if I can pick up on that point, David, why put US ships in harm's way? There will be some of those countries who are sitting back at the moment saying, why would we put our ships in harm's way?
I think that, again, their interests dictate their actions eventually, and it is in the interest of every economy that is of any significance to help make the straits open. The point I think it's worth focusing on is that many of these countries do not want to be associated with the ongoing campaign against Iran. That doesn't mean that they won't want to be part of a coalition that deals with the aftermath effectively. And the United States can and should be part of that as well. But it's a question of sequential behavior.
Yeah. With or without America's involvement, the president has made it quite clear he expects other countries who rely on the energy supplies produced in the Gulf to take on a role in reopening the strait.
The countries of the world that do receive oil through the Hormuz Strait must take care of that passage. They must cherish it. They must grab it and cherish it. They can do it easily. We will be helpful, but they should take the lead in protecting the oil that they so desperately depend on.
So, David, what should those other countries be doing?
Well, exactly what they are doing. I mean, I would like to see more, but frankly, they are getting together. I think they are putting aside some of the political antagonism directed toward President Trump, and they're recognizing what their interests are, which means maximum political, economic pressure on Iran. Look, once our military campaign is phasing out, what is the justification for Iran's closure of the Straits? None. And that is going to be the point that's going to bring this coalition against Iran to be effective. It's the fact that even China, in the initiative, the 5-point initiative with Pakistan, was focused on maintaining the free flow of navigation through that strait. That will put enormous pressure on Iran, and I think we can look to other countries to help greatly with that.
Okay, I do want to get to that in a moment. Of course, as you saw and have mentioned, the UK Ministry of Defence has announced there will be a meeting of military planners next week to discuss viable options, was the phrase used, to make the strait accessible and safe. Now, that doesn't use the words open, and the word viable maybe is you doing a lot of heavy lifting there, Tom. No presence of the US. What does a viable option look like without the US there at the current moment?
Well, first of all, I think we need to see what the U.S. does to continue to degrade Iran's efforts to do anything there. And the Houthis. Taking down Iran's ability to hit those areas, I think, is very, very critical to making this work. At that point, they could put their ships through there. There can be some takeover of parts of Iran, some of the islands there to try to ensure passage. But I think there are numerous options ahead that I think these countries will decide how they want to participate.
I may be backtracking a bit here, David, but can we talk about this a bit more? The countries that are expected to take some role in reopening the strait, they didn't start the war. They certainly have refused to be, by and large, certainly not directly militarily involved in the war. And I accept that obviously there is some benefit to them, quite a lot of benefit to them in terms of energy and fuel resources. But is there a risk here that they are being asked to incur some kind of military loss, huge economic cost, perhaps even lives lost, should they head into that area while it is still potentially quite fraught with Iran's possibility of reigniting the conflict?
Well, a lot of hypotheticals there.
Sure,
I also,
but not unreasonable necessarily.
No, but they have a lot at stake as well. And frankly, what we're seeing is there was a shadow hanging over all of us, including the Gulf Arabs. It was called the Iranian terrorist threat. We're now seeing what they potentially could do. So we have a president who's taken steps that no previous president was willing to take to change that equation. And I think once we're done with the intense military part of this, other countries can step in and help us out. I don't think the United States is going to be able to be completely absent from that. The value of our intelligence, our political relationships, our communication skills, the economic things we can do directed toward Iran will all play part of this in pressuring them to do the right thing, or the necessary thing.
The closure of the Strait of Hormuz, of course, presents another worrying concern, the potential for other nations to unilaterally close vital waterways, something the Secretary of State is acutely aware of.
Not only is the sovereignty over the Straits of Hormuz not acceptable to us, it won't be acceptable to the world. No one in the world can accept it. Number one, it sets an incredible precedent. So this means that nations can now take over international waterways and claim them as their own. The United States could do that now.
All right, Tom, is this another Suez Canal?
I don't think so. I think it's going to be resolved shortly in the next couple of months. But continuing to degrade Iran is a critical part of this, getting international forces or ships in there to ensure that the straits are free and clear, I think is a part of that. And I think it's all in the doable range. Just remember this, sooner or later, Iran was going to get a nuclear weapon. And at that point, some of these European countries could have been the targets as they put these long-range ballistic missiles in there. So I think this was going to happen sooner or later, and I think the president felt this was the right time.
Okay. David, can I ask you, and I'm sorry to keep putting these hypotheticals to you, I'll apologize in advance, but what is the risk that other waterways become subjected to this kind of conflict chokehold? And I'm thinking, portion of the South China Sea or a Northwest Passage type conflict.
Right, it's a lesson to all of us, and that's why certain principles need to be laid down, and because the Straits of Malacca is one example. There are a dozen places around the world you can pinpoint where it's not just energy, but basically international trade is primarily shipborne. So it's very important that the United States continue to play a strong role with others who are dependent upon this to lay the principle down.
Tom, where does the US lie then in terms of its international obligations? Now, I know they're not legally bound to patrol waterways, but what obligation does the US have in terms of monitoring waterways?
Well, we're the strongest Navy in the world, and I think we bear that responsibility at this point. I still think we are the lead free country in the world in terms of ensuring that the world order is restored and safe for everybody. So I think that will continue. And I think we recognize at this point that military spending has got to continue to be a part of where America is. It's a dangerous world.
All right, the UN has also heard from Gulf leaders who are, of course, primarily concerned with the ongoing disruption to their economies and main trade route.
Disruption in the Gulf immediately affects global markets, and this has become evident in recent events when navigation through the Strait of Hormuz has been disrupted. This has led to higher oil prices, increased shipping and insurance costs, and heightened risks to global energy and economic stability.
Tom, I'll come to you. If Iran opens up the waterway but wants to maintain control, is that a partial compromise in terms of at least getting the route open again?
Well, I think everybody wants the route open. The world needs the route open, so I think that's primary. But what the conditions the United States is willing to accept so that they don't come in and build a bomb and export terrorism to other countries, I think that's a non-negotiable demand.
There are other sorts of demands that could be made here, David. I'm thinking of the likes of, if they maintain control of the Strait, imposing taxes or fees. And that is one of, we do understand from Iranian media that there is a draft protocol with Oman being prepared, and that may be one of the features of a report such as that. Would that be a concern?
I suspect it'd be a red line for many nations, including the United States. Free flow of transportation through these places is critically important. This isn't some canal that somebody paid for and built. This is a natural, this is part of the world, and there are two sides to the straits. So I think that is something that everyone with an interest in free navigation would oppose.
Is there a tipping point at which perhaps they would pay a fee?
I would really doubt it.
Okay. Do you agree?
I agree with that. Maybe on a temporary basis to get things as they get clogged up, but I don't think the world will stand for it.
Yeah.
Just a terrible precedent.
The US does still get around 10% of its energy from the region, but the president was at pains to point out in his address that supply is not an issue.
Remember, because of our Drill Baby Drill program, America has plenty of gas. We have so much gas. Under my leadership, we are #1 producer of oil and gas on the planet, without even discussing the millions of barrels that we're getting from Venezuela.
All right, David, I'll come to you. Is the US going to write off that supply from the Gulf?
I think that's a short-sighted approach. Energy markets are interconnected. It's a fungible commodity. The United States, since 1945, has been committed to the defense of the free flow of energy out of the Persian Gulf because it's in our global interests. Even back then, we were energy independent. We are again, which is good, and the president's right. That gives us certain strengths, but it doesn't make us immune to the consequences of turbulence there.
Tom, do you agree with that?
I agree. It's priced globally, so any hindrance of getting that into the marketplace is going to affect prices here, particularly going into an election cycle.
He seems pretty determined, though, that the US does not need anything from that region at the moment.
Well, I think we want their support, but if we have to go it alone, I think he's made it clear we're willing to do that with Israel.
Yeah. There's been a lot made of US domestic production, David. Do you feel that that is a message meant to reassure the public, even if it's perhaps a shifting picture at times?
Partly, but I also think it is, as Tom's, I think, alluding to, it's meant to put pressure on others who are even more dependent on energy from the Gulf to step up and play a role here, even if it's not to join the campaign this moment, to help us with the long-term consequences.
All right. Can we look at what any withdrawal from the conflict, where do you see that immediately having an impact on energy prices and stability of the market?
Well, I think once the straits are opened up, I think it will take some time, but I think oil prices go down. And that's important for domestic American politics. I don't think the president's going to make his decision on what's good for the Republican Party per se, but I think everybody understands that oil prices, gas prices are something the American voters see viscerally and has an effect on their voting behavior in November. So we're eager to get the straits reopened as quickly as we can.
Yeah. The United States' own energy secretary doesn't seem too concerned about any immediate impact on America's capacity to produce or export oil.
I mean, markets do what markets do. Prices went up to send signals to everyone that can produce more, please produce more. The prices have not risen high enough yet to drive meaningful demand destruction, but Americans and energy entrepreneurs around the world are ingenious. So things are being done.
All right, David, things are being done. Do you feel confident in that message?
Look, I'm not an expert on energy markets, so I have to defer to them. But I do think that the duration of this campaign it will end, and markets will reestablish a balance.
All right, Tom, any final thoughts?
No, I think everybody here is hopeful this can be resolved, but I don't think the president's going to withdraw until we can make sure Iran can no longer export terrorism and doesn't have nuclear capability.
The Strait might be closed for a while to go. All right, Tom Davis, a former Republican congressman, and David Hale, former US ambassador and Under-Secretary of State for Political Affairs. Thank you both.
Thank you.
That global traffic jam in the Strait of Hormuz is also centre stage online. Americans at home have been feeling the economic weight of the conflict and wondering what their president is willing to do about it. Alex Baird has been following the conversation.
The world's economic choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, and the world watching Iran's chokehold online. Trump had been navigating how to force that open, but now increasingly, he's leaning back.
When this conflict is over, the Strait will open up naturally. It'll just open up naturally.
Pulitzer Prize winner Anne Applebaum hearing echoes of his comments on COVID. One day, like a miracle, it'll disappear. Iran's military reminding Trump that any dreams of controlling Hormuz will be buried together with the US. AI videos like this doing the rounds of millions. Club Hormuz closed to the president. Iran allowing only the tankers of a very select few nations through. And maritime hawks watching those movements and lack thereof in real time. Professor Robert Pape saying despite Trump's projection of strength, Iran's power over the global economy won't suddenly disappear with some choice words.
Going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
That speech from the White House on Wednesday night in D.C. dismissed by Democrats. Senator Chuck Schumer saying, has there ever been a more rambling, disjointed and pathetic presidential war speech? One of America's greatest blunders. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio sticking to his president's guns, quite literally, peace through strength. Despite that fatigue is starting to show. Even conservative heavyweights getting tired of that saber rattling. The executive producer of the Charlie Kirk Show saying, it's time to go home, let's declare victory and leave.
Alex Baird reporting. That's all from the team here in Washington, D.C. On This Is America, we'll keep following the decisions that shape the US and influence the world. If you want to catch up on this episode or previous ones, head to our website, aljazeera.com, or check out our YouTube channel. For now, we'll hand back to Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha for more coverage of the Iran war, as well as a full update of the rest of the day's news. Thanks for joining us.
Carlson, and this is Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. Coming up, the U.S. president steps up his threats to destroy Iran's power plants after sharing a video of a bridge being blown up. As the war in Iran rages on, the U.S. Defense Secretary asks the Army Chief of Staff to step down. General Randy George is leaving the post immediately. The rush to fill up the tank in Pakistan. The government hikes up petrol and diesel prices due to the war. And we look at how the war on Iran could determine President Trump's legacy and the United States' position as a global superpower. Thank you for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump has renewed threats to Iran's leaders. He's warning that more bridges and power plants will be targeted next in a joint bombing campaign with Israel. Trump has piled pressure on Iran to negotiate, saying its leaders know what has to be done and they must do it fast. And while the war rages in Iran, Trump's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has asked the U.S. military chief of staff to step down. The Pentagon says General Randy George ceases his duties with immediate effect. On the ground, some of the latest U.S. and Israeli attacks hit a key bridge west of Tehran. State media say at least 8 people were killed and 95 injured. But Tehran says strikes will not compel it to surrender. Senior Iranian military officials have upped their defiance, saying the Strait of Hormuz remains open to global shipping, but closed to, quote, enemies of Iran. The warnings leave countries in the region on high alert. Gulf leaders denounced Iranian attacks at a UN Security Council meeting, demanding that all maritime waterways stay open.
The GCC also calls on the Security Council to take all necessary measures to do the following. First, immediately halt Iranian attacks against GCC states. Second, protect maritime corridors and guarantee uninterrupted maritime navigation through all strategic waterways, taking all necessary means to achieve that. Third, include GCC states in any discussions and agreements with Iran to enhance the general security and prevent further escalation or the repetition of such attacks in the future.
We have correspondents covering the latest developments from Tehran, here in Doha, and in Singapore. But first, Rosalind Jordan has this update from Washington, D.C.
The U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly insisted that he doesn't need a deal with the Iranian government in order to end the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. But that said, the U.S. has been putting a lot of pressure on Tehran to accept the 15-point proposal presented to the Iranian government via Pakistani intermediaries by Steve Witkoff, the president's special envoy. The Iranians have insisted they're not going to accept this deal. And so in the last 24 hours, the U.S. President Donald Trump has been threatening to target not just Iranian military installations, but Iranian civilian installations as well in order to compel them to agree to this deal. This is coming as late on Thursday night, Washington time, Trump took to his personal social media platform to threaten not just renewed U.S. military attacks on Iranian military targets, but to also target a key civilian infrastructure, the electricity production facilities around the country. If the U.S. were to make good on the president's threat, that would constitute a war crime under the international law of war. Whether or not the U.S. military actually carries out attacks on electricity power plants remains to be seen. But this is an escalation of at least the rhetoric coming from the Trump administration at a time when the president is also saying that he thinks this war will be ending within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's bring Mohammed Val in now, who is standing by live for us in Tehran. Mohammed, this post from the U.S. president carries these threats about attacks on bridges and electrical power plants. They're not necessarily new, but how is the Iranian administration taking them?
Well, Riley, they are taking these threats seriously because they have seen the implementation already underway. Power blackouts because of the strikes that touched some of the power facilities around Tehran and Karaj over the last 3 days. The third time was overnight. So they don't only take it seriously, but they know this is underway, as I said, and they are expecting more of it. And they are also looking at it as war crimes committed against civilians and facilities that have to do with the lives of 90 million Iranians, those Iranians who have been promised emancipation and freedom coming with this war. Now they are seeing their daily life being impacted and being killed there, like what happened on that bridge yesterday. And also the Iranians are saying that these crimes against humanity, crimes of war and so on, are not going to force Iran to come to the negotiation table because they know that any deal under coercion and under the threat of power will not be for the favor of Iran. So they're not looking at those demands or those offers by the United States to strike a deal as something that is going to help Iran. So there is no readiness in that respect. But on the other hand, they are using whatever power they have to strike against the Israelis and the American bases across the region. And they say that this is the only approach that is available now and the only approach, only type of language that should be used against Americans and Israelis at the moment.
Now, I want to take you back to that bridge, Mohammed, that you alluded to there. We were seeing pictures of it while you were speaking. Iranian state TV is saying that the attack on that bridge was a double tap strike. What else are you learning about what happened there?
Yeah, and because of that double tap strike, more civilians have been killed or wounded, and also, again, subject to condemnation by the Iranian leaders, considering it a war crime. And that bridge, which has just been finished and hasn't yet been inaugurated, is a place where some civilians also were making picnics there because it was Nature Day here, people celebrating the beginning of spring and the end of the Nowruz season. So some families were around that place. There was no expectation that that bridge would be struck. And also the second strike was really devastating to rescue workers and people who gathered at the site to try to help those who were wounded. Again, Iranians saying this is another crime, and many infrastructure facilities, other infrastructure facilities have been hit, like the Pasteur Institute for the production of vaccines, a 100-year-old institution that has been helping civilians over several decades. It has also produced vaccines for COVID. That institute has been severely damaged in a strike here in Tehran overnight, and that's also subject to condemnation. They are saying that no matter how many facilities are destroyed, the Iranians are going to rebuild them. But what can't be rebuilt, according to the foreign minister here commenting on that incident, is America's standing because of the crimes that it is committing against the Iranian people.
Mohammed Val reporting live for us in Tehran. Thank you, Mohammed. Let's bring Victoria Gatenby in now. She's here in Doha. And Victoria, the IRGC is talking about targeting IT centers and bridges in retaliation. What are they saying?
Yeah, so Iranian media reporting that the IRGC is pledging to increase its attacks on infrastructure in GCC countries, as well as American IT firms that are based in this region. Now, there are conflicting reports overnight as to how successful some of those attacks have been. The IRGC claimed to have attacked Oracle's data center in Dubai. That was immediately called false by Dubai's media center. They say the IRGC has falsified that report. Now, in Bahrain, the IRGC say they have attacked an Amazon cloud facility. The Bahraini Interior Ministry have confirmed that a company facility was targeted by a missile on Wednesday. They say they haven't confirmed that it was an Amazon facility, but certainly the Financial Times in London is reporting that that is the case. No confirmation from Amazon to confirm or deny those reports at the moment. But the IRGC say that these are just the start of its attacks, really, on companies around this region that are American-based. They say that's in retaliation for the assassination attempts and successful assassinations of Iranian leaders in the region.
And Victoria, Gulf countries obviously want to see an end to this, especially as the threats and the missiles keep coming. Talk us through the 3 demands they made at the United Nations today.
So, Riley, the first demand was that the UN Security Council does all that it can, really, to try to stop the attacks on GCC countries. They've been calling for this from day one. They want the immediate stop of attacks by Iran on this region. And we've seen overnight why that needs to happen, really. Kuwait, at the moment, its sirens are sounding. It says it's dealing with missiles and drones that are incoming. Bahrain has sounded its warning sirens 3 times overnight in as many hours. And Saudi Arabia also says that it's been intercepting drones. So GCC countries calling for an immediate stop to these attacks by Iran. The second point that it wanted to make at that meeting of the UN Security Council was that key waterways like the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb Strait, they have to be protected. GCC countries completely reject Iran's suggestion that it might permanently close the Strait of Hormuz to ships that are flagged with an American flag or an Israeli flag. GCC countries also opposed to Iran's suggestion that there might be some kind of toll or payment that vessels have to make to go through those waterways. And finally, They said that GCC countries needed to be involved in any kind of settlement, peace negotiation that was going to happen between Israel, the US, and Iran. They point out that this region has borne the brunt of the attacks of this conflict over the last month, and that their interests need to be represented also to maintain stability, because they're facing at the moment some kind of security crisis and an economic crisis too.
Victoria Gatenby reporting live in Doha. Thank you, Victoria. As Victoria was telling us, the head of the Gulf Cooperation Council has called on the United Nations to act immediately to halt Iranian attacks in the region. Gabriel Elizondo has more from the UN's headquarters in New York.
Bahrain's foreign minister came to New York to chair a UN Security Council meeting and to try to push for council action on Iran.
The Kingdom of Bahrain submitted a draft resolution to your esteemed council on Iran's unlawful and unjustified attempt to control international navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, placing before the council a draft that requires a decisive response to such actions that are irresponsible and illegitimate, actions that threaten the interests of nations and peoples around the world.
That draft resolution, seen by Al Jazeera, has gone through 4 separate iterations after Russia and China rejected language that explicitly referenced the use of force to open the Strait of Hormuz. The Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council also attended the meeting.
We stand at a crossroads, a real test of the credibility of the international system. Either collective security prevails and is safeguarded, or we leave the world vulnerable to the rule of force. We in the GCC are advocates of stability and partners in responsibility. We extend our hand in peace, yet we will not compromise our security, sovereignty, or regional stability.
Before the meeting, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke to reporters and had a direct message to the warring parties.
To the United States and Israel, it's high time to stop the war that is inflicting immense human suffering and already triggering devastating economic consequences. To Iran, to stop attacking their neighbors.
As the war enters its 2nd month, we can expect to hear more from the Security Council in the coming days and weeks. That's because Bahrain holds the rotating presidency of the Council this month, allowing it to help shape the diplomatic agenda. Gabriel Elizondo, Al Jazeera at the United Nations in New York.
Reports that Oman and Iran are drafting a protocol to monitor traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has led to some markets in Asia opening slightly higher. South Korea's main Kospi index rose by nearly 3% an hour after opening. The price of crude oil is trading at about $110 a barrel. That's the highest it's been in 4 years. The Philippines says it's held positive and productive talks with Iran to allow oil shipments to pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz. Let's talk to Patrick Falk now, who joins us live from Singapore. Patrick, is this where the optimism is coming from, even though we don't seem to be any closer to any deals?
Well, it appears to be so. As you say, doesn't seem like we're getting any closer to any sort of resolution. And in fact, in the last 24 hours, President Trump has escalated his threat against Iran. Energy prices also continuing to rise. Brent crude, you say, trading at around $110 a barrel, up 8% from previously. And yet we're seeing markets reverse some of yesterday's sharp losses. Now, some markets in the region are closed for the long Easter weekend, including here in Singapore. But the main markets that have been affected by the energy crisis, South Korea's Kospi, for instance, up around 3%. Japan's Nikkei 225 up around 1%. So, it is interesting to see how markets are reacting to the latest developments, as you say, particularly because of the talks that have taken place between Iran and Oman and reports about a draft proposal to transit movement through the Strait of Hormuz. And that's doing a lot to alleviate concerns about energy supplies in this region. As we said many times before, a lot of Asian countries rely heavily on imports via the Middle East. It's also notable because it says a lot about what's driving markets exactly. It's not so much, it appears, to be the crisis itself, but the supply situation, concerns about energy flows into this part of the world. So what we're seeing now is, a reversal of what we had the day before. How long it lasts, how this is going to work all practically remains to be seen, but it's certainly lifting the mood among investors right now.
Okay, well, let's talk about that deal. Iran has agreed to allow Philippine ships and seafarers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. How big of a development is that, and what are you learning about the details of it?
Yeah, well, it's a big development certainly for the Philippines. And again, it's another sign of movement through the Strait of Hormuz, importantly. The Philippines had been reaching out to Iran for some time now for talks, and particularly it wanted to be designated as a non-hostile state so they could receive shipments of oil. Those talks have now taken place. The Philippines Foreign Minister Teresa Lazaro said that they were productive and positive, and that her Iranian counterpart had said that Philippine ships would be allowed safe, unhindered and expeditious passage. That's for Philippine flag vessels, Philippine energy, as well as Philippine seafarers, importantly. A lot of those Philippine nationals are manning a lot of the tankers that are sailing through the Strait of Hormuz. And it is important in particular because Philippines has been really struggling with energy supply disruptions and shortages. We've been reporting before that the Philippines is down to just a few weeks of oil supplies. And in fact, just the other day, Manila said that it had procured about 2.5 million barrels from Russia out of extreme necessity.
All right, Patrick Falk reporting live for us in Singapore. Patrick, thank you. Australia's Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, has urged people getting away for the Easter weekend to fill up in cities to help rural areas where most fuel shortages are. The government says hundreds of petrol stations across the country had run out of fuel by Friday.
Do encourage people to stick to being with their family. But we also encourage people to be sensible, not to take more fuel than you need, to fill up when you need to, but not before that, and to get as much fuel as you normally would. Also, for those Australians planning a road trip this weekend, given our shortages are predominantly in rural and regional Australia, it makes sense to fill up in the city to help the country if you can.
The U.S. and Israel's war with Iran continues to disrupt global oil supplies. Pakistan has now said it will raise prices for diesel by nearly 55%. Petrol will raise by more than 40%. The finance minister announced subsidies for small farmers and for intercity transportation of goods. Osama bin Javed is in Karachi, where he's been speaking to people about the price hikes.
Well, anger and frustration, if I can summarize it in two words. We've been speaking to people in the last half hour when these prices were announced, and it was that frenzy of queues. They've just cleared up behind me. And there's a number of people who we've been speaking to who tell us that this is a situation where they have not been able to plan for. People were frustrated, saying that this is a country which has been able to continue to get the fuel supplies from the Strait of Hormuz, and they cannot understand why the government is reducing those subsidies. The government of Pakistan says that it has been providing about $500 million, give or take, in the last 4 weeks as subsidy. With us is Mehtab, who's a student. We were just speaking to him a moment ago. Mehtab, what is your reaction about this price hike? What do you think?
It's the worst part of life. So if you earn monthly 15 to 20,000, so how you can survive?
But they're going to give you 2,000 rupees a month in subsidy still.
Worst part of life. Worst.
Why?
458 petrol and diesel rises every day, and usually high octane is rises. So how you survive? If you want 15 to 20,000 month, so how you survive?
Thank you very much. Well, that's one view, and that is kind of the resounding view here, where people have been coming to fuel stations, talking to the petrol, the people who were here, the station owners. There were some fisticuffs here as well. People were angry, but essentially this is what people were expecting as what will happen if the prices continue to rise. Pakistan's government says it is facing a financial crunch. It cannot continue to give unlimited subsidies, and it has to pass on the rising fuel costs to the consumer. We've been speaking to officials here who tell us Pakistan only has about 20 to 24 days of supplies for fuel that is left in the country. And unless the government does something drastic, unless the war stops, unless there is renewed vigor in making sure those supply lines continue, these prices are continue to go up. And that is the fear here
in Karachi at the moment as the new fuel prices have just come into effect.
Russia says it's ready to help de-escalate tensions in the Middle East. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov discussed the Strait of Hormuz with his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi. The Kremlin spokesman says President Vladimir Putin is also in talks with Gulf state leaders.
Regarding the war in Iran, President Putin is a staunch supporter of the idea that all disagreements should be resolved exclusively through political and diplomatic means. This is precisely what the president spoke about during his series of international telephone conversations with the heads of states of the Gulf and the Arab world. And the president continues these contacts. And if our services are somehow required, we are, of course, ready to do our part to ensure that the military situation transitions to a peaceful course as soon as possible.
More than a month into the war in Iran, Donald Trump is describing it as a success. And although the president says it will wind down soon, one of the world's vital shipping lanes is still heavily restricted. Richard Gaisford has more from New York.
Their equipment's been totally decimated. They have nothing.
Donald Trump's view on the Strait of Hormuz is clear.
What happens to the strait, we're not going to have anything to do with.
In one way, he's right. Very few of the oil tankers and ships currently blocked from passing through this crucial channel will be headed to the US. 20% of the world's oil flows through this narrow sea passage, bordered on one side by Iran. But it's the impact on global oil prices and the knock-on effects to economies around the world that's most definitely of concern to the president, with warnings that if the strait isn't opened, the situation this month will be much worse than last.
The loss of oil in April will be twice the loss of oil in March. I think it will cut the economic growth in many countries, and especially in emerging and developing countries where they don't have the hard currencies, they may be even a bigger difficulty. And we may well see, Nikolai, in many countries, the rationing of energy may be coming soon.
Whilst the US is a major producer of crude oil, much of which is exported, it also has to import different types of oil to supplement production at domestic refineries. That means it buys and sells on the global market, with prices spiking due to the conflict.
Well, Donald Trump might say that America has more crude oil than it needs, and that is certainly true of certain types of oils, but it also needs other types to come into the country, and that's what happens here at the Bayway refinery. They can process up to 250,000 barrels of crude oil every day here. Some of it comes from North Dakota by train. It's shale oil, but the rest, well, that comes by boat from Canada, from the North Sea, and sometimes from West Africa.
That means fuel prices are fast going up across the United States, and that is very much the president's problem. Despite still being much lower than elsewhere in the world, the price at the pump here impacts political popularity. In many ways, this is Donald Trump's Suez moment. In 1956, Egypt nationalized the canal that links the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt to regain control. Despite their military success, they were forced to withdraw after pressure from the US and Soviet Union. It weakened their global influence. And maintaining global influence will be key to a president who, despite his mantra of America first, still wants his country to be the leading world power. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, New York.
Barbara Slavin is a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center. She says it's unlikely Trump will achieve any of his goals with a ground operation in Iran.
There's no love lost in this country for Iran, but the war on Iran has never had majority support. It was never properly explained. We are 4 or 5 weeks into it, and this is the first time that the President of the United States gave a speech trying to lay out his goals. It didn't go very well. I was looking at some accounts among Republican political strategists who were very disappointed with the speech and scratching their heads afterward, asking, what was this supposed to accomplish? Again, it was a kind of hodgepodge of excuses, reasons, rationales for the war without a clear strategy to achieve really any of these aims. I sincerely hope we will not see a ground operation. I think that would be very high risk. And I know that there have been members of the military cautioning the administration. Certainly, we hear a lot of retired members of the military on all the cable news channels cautioning the administration not to mount any kind of ground operation. But the troops are there if the president decides he wants to have some sort of final commando operation, perhaps trying to seize Karga Island or some of the nuclear material that remains in Iran. We're not out of this yet, and clearly Donald Trump thinks he's achieving something by continuing the war.
Earlier, my colleague Adrian Finnegan spoke to Tommy Pigott, the U.S. State Department's principal deputy spokesperson. He says Trump's been clear about the war's objectives.
Well, fundamentally, what we saw yesterday was a powerful speech from President Trump that outlined how we got here, the rationale, the clear objectives of Operation Epic Fury, and the path forward. Those objectives being crystal clear from this president, going back, honestly, to the beginning of this administration, when underlying all of this is the reality that the Iranian regime cannot have a nuclear weapon. I think importantly as well, the president, of course, always wanted to see that option for diplomacy. But as he made clear in that speech, the option for diplomacy was given before Operation Midnight Hammer, was given after Operation Midnight Hammer, and yet we saw that pursuit of a nuclear weapon by the Iranian regime. That is an intolerable threat to the United States and to the world.
As the conflict widens with developments in Lebanon and now with the Houthis in Yemen, what diplomatic efforts are underway to prevent further escalation?
Well, look, I think the broader context here is incredibly important. And that's the maximum pressure policy that President Trump has had from the beginning of this administration, even in his previous administration. And that included terrorist proxies, terrorist groups across the region. Sanctions and other restrictions designed to deny them the funds necessary to continue their malign activities. We've seen that from the beginning of this administration. We've seen those efforts continue. So that's the important context here. The emphasis the president has put on stopping the financing, stopping the ability of terrorist proxies to destabilize the region, to stop their malign activities.
Iranian missile attacks have continued on Israel, while the Israeli military says it intercepted the majority. Some are making it through. A ballistic missile hit Petah Tikva in central Israel on Thursday evening, bypassing air defense systems. It landed between a residential neighborhood and the city's industrial zone, causing a large crater. The shockwave heavily damaged nearby buildings. Health officials in Lebanon say at least 4 people have been killed in an Israeli attack in the south. The Israeli army says it's targeting Hezbollah. In response, more than 100 rockets have been fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel since Thursday morning. A kindergarten in the north was reportedly hit by rocket shrapnel. The Lebanese health ministries say more than 1,300 people have been killed since Israel resumed its attacks on Lebanon last month. The situation is dire for more than 1 million people who've been displaced.
I don't see anything ahead of me now. All I see is how to keep my children safe and provide for their needs during the day. I'm living one day at a time now, checking on the children, my father, my sister, the family, what they lack. Maybe we won't return. Maybe we will be martyred, or maybe God will allow us to go back. Only God knows. But telling me to think about the future? In war, you can't think about the future.
Lebanon's prime minister says his country has become the victim of a war that doesn't seem to have an end in sight. In an address to the nation, Nawaf Salam said the situation is critical.
It has become clear that the Israeli aggression against Lebanon will not be limited to continuing the military operations we have witnessed for the past 16 months. Since the declaration of the cessation of the hostilities agreement in November 2014, the statements of Israeli officials and the actions of their army reveal far-reaching objectives. There has been a significant expansion of the occupation of Lebanese territory, dangerous talk of establishing buffer zones or security belts, and the displacement of more than 1 million Lebanese.
You're watching Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. Here's a reminder of the main developments this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump has once again warned of destruction of Iranian bridges and power plants. In a social media post, Trump says Iran's new leaders know what has to be done fast. Iran's Revolutionary Guard vow they will attack bridges across the region in retaliation. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has asked the military's chief of staff to step down. The Pentagon says General Randy George has ceased his duties effective immediately. His departure comes as the joint operation with Israel against Iran enters a second month. Gulf leaders have called the Iranian attacks on their countries pre-planned and aggressive. Speaking at a UN Security Council meeting, the Gulf Cooperation Council urged Tehran to stop all attacks and said the bloc should be part of any future diplomacy. President Donald Trump's speech on Wednesday had been expected to announce either an end to the war in Iran or an escalation with ground operations inside the country. It did neither. Instead, it has made oil prices jump and some markets slide. Ume Kulsum Sharif explains.
President Trump has downplayed the United States' reliance on the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important waterways. Now, Iran's near closure of it in the past month has led to the largest global energy market disruptions in decades. Now, President Trump says the U.S. imports almost no oil from here and won't be taking any in the future. It's true, crude imports into the U.S. have fallen drastically over the years, but it still relies on the Strait of Hormuz for a fraction of its imports. Now, government data shows in 2024, it brought in 500,000 barrels per day. That's 7% of its total crude oil imports and 2% of its petroleum product imports. The way President Trump also sees it, the U.S. is the world's largest producer of oil and gas, and it's insulated with what's happening thousands of kilometers away. And yet, people are paying more at the pumps because gas prices are more than $1 a liter, the highest since 2022. Now, the U.S. and Israel's war on Iran has also left the rest of the world feeling the pain of supply disruptions and rising prices. Hours into President Trump's speech, we've had oil prices jump and we've had Asian stocks slump. Now, the UK and dozens of countries have held talks on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Remember, much of the oil and gas produced in the region is headed to Asia, but some part of it also up from the Suez Canal into Europe. About 2,000 ships are stranded because of Iran's partial blockade in retaliation to US and Israeli strikes. Now, before the conflict, tankers carried 20 million barrels of oil, or 20% of global energy consumption, passed through this strait every single day. But in the past month, very few ships have made this passage in coordination with Tehran.
The UK has convened a virtual meeting of representatives from more than 40 countries to discuss fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The talks focused on how to use political and diplomatic means to remove restrictions at the waterway. Rory Challens reports from London.
No fleets of black limos outside the Foreign Office in London. So hastily was this summit organised that the 40 or so foreign ministers joining Yvette Cooper did so by video call. The remit: to find viable political and diplomatic measures to get the Straits of Hormuz moving. Though here's the important part. Explicitly after the fighting has finished, there is no appetite for getting involved in Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu's war, despite the criticism that there has been of Iran's behavior.
Iran's reckless strikes are attacking international shipping, seeking to hijack the global economy. That's affecting petrol prices and mortgage rates here in the UK, but also jet fuel across the world, fertilizer to Africa, and also gas to Asia. So countries across the world being impacted, and that's why we're so determined to see every possible diplomatic, economic, and coordinated measure to get the Straits reopened.
Though concrete steps to open the Straits of Hormuz will be hard to navigate, the political and diplomatic focus of these talks suggests that most countries are still unprepared to put their military hardware into harm's way, though the British Ministry of Defence is gathering another meeting next week of many of the same players. Donald Trump has washed his hands of US responsibility for opening the Straits and says it will be easy, though the countries gathered on Thursday are far from sure of that. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera in London.
Let's get a closer look now at the economic impact of the continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz. From London, here's Milena Veselinovic.
Hello and welcome to Al Jazeera studio in London, where hopes of a speedy resolution to the Iran conflict evaporated again on Thursday after the latest comments by the US president. In Europe, markets were down and the oil price surged once again, up 7% on yesterday to $106 a barrel. And here in the UK, where most goods and materials are transported by trucks and heavy goods vehicles, the implications are massive. Higher diesel prices mean higher delivery costs, something that will ultimately mean higher prices for consumers. Now, in Australia, the government has announced it will make nearly $700 million in interest-free loans available to companies, including transport operators.
These firms are not just being affected by this global crisis, they are essential to Australia getting through this crisis as well. So our government will extend their credit to help them and the farmers and producers who rely on these supply chains to weather the storm. No government can promise to eliminate the pressures the global crisis will impose, but we can be a buffer against the worst of it, a shock absorber in a time of global shocks.
Well, joining us now is the Professor of Economics at the University of Surrey, Erik Gulson. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, we've heard the Australian Prime Minister there trying to mitigate the economic impact of the war on people in his country as the markets tumble after that latest speech by Donald Trump. Why have his words yet again had such an impact on the markets?
I think the markets are returning to reality now, right? The reality of a drawn-out, long-term conflict for a while. We're looking at talking to bring to a resolution, which as far as economists go and markets go is always a negative. I think the Australians and others are going to try and make business easier to do now. That may give markets it may give them a little bit of insurance over the next couple of weeks. Probably you will see things still go down though. But obviously, the problems here are many that need to be fixed.
Professor Erik Gulson, stay with us. We'll get back to you in a few minutes. I just want to talk about something that's essential about when it comes to moving the economy, and that's hauliers. They are the lifeblood of the supply chain, delivering goods and materials around the country. Now, the road transport sector moves 80% of all goods and materials across the UK. And since the Iran conflict began, diesel prices have risen significantly. In some regions, as much as 30%. And for large fleets, this can add tens of thousands of dollars to weekly fuel bills. Now, that's led some companies to add fuel surcharges to help absorb this cost. And there's also an additional knock-on effect because container ships have been disrupted by the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So import and export cargo is being delayed, meaning fewer delivery jobs for the haulage industry. Now, one company operating west of London has seen its diesel costs jump 50% in recent weeks. And Camille Nedelec went to see what kind of challenges they're facing.
Logistics firms like this one are the lifeblood of an economy, and the UK is no exception. Everything we drink, eat, and wear at some point has passed through a road haulage firm before reaching retail shelves and getting in our hands. Even before the Iran war, these types of firms, especially small family-owned businesses, were running on very tight margins, meaning that these fuel hikes are adding fuel to a fire that was already well underway.
It's a ginormous cost for a company of our size to try and swallow. You're talking £200,000 over the year, the cost of 2 additional vehicles that we no longer can buy because we've just got to pay this additional diesel cost. I'm confident we can continue as we are now, but I'm worried about a lot of other operators in the same industry as us because it will have a massive knock-on impact for all sectors of our economy as soon as more and more operators are unable to get food on the shelves.
The UK Road Haulage Association is calling on the government to do more to lower costs, as well as publish a contingency plan in the event of fuel shortages. This, as spiralling costs for the UK haulage industry will accelerate rising costs elsewhere in the economy. Camille Nedelec, Al Jazeera, Twyford, England.
Well, joining us now from Leicester is Claire Bottle. She is the CEO of the UK Warehousing Association. Very good to speak to you. Thank you for being with us. Now, first off, can you please tell us what kind of an effect have you and your members seen on the supply chain?
Well, as we were just hearing, even though fuel supplies are secure, we're already seeing those rising diesel prices. And the UK is a very open economy. Last year, our goods trade deficit was £243 billion. And what that means is we're really highly exposed to global disruption, not just in road transport, but also those rising costs affecting air freight and shipping. And those costs will feed through to businesses and ultimately to consumers. Companies are going to have to prioritize resilience over efficiency. That means holding more stock, and that will rely on more warehousing buffers to help manage these supply chain shocks.
Well, this is a really important point that you raised, that this will impact on consumers. And can you just paint a picture on how it will affect ordinary people? But we also live in a world where we're used to ordering things one day and expecting to get them the next day. How will this affect that?
Well, as I said, at the moment, we think that fuel supplies remain secure, but people are feeling uncertainty, and uncertainty always prices in extra costs within the supply chain. There's no immediate risk. UK supply chains are very well managed, but our members are handling things like food and medicines, and the longer that disruption goes on, the more that pressure builds. Longer transit times, higher costs, all of that can eat into the shelf life for fresh products and increase the risk of waste. And while it's fairly easy to substitute different foods, that's more difficult with medicines where the supply chains are more tightly controlled. Perhaps there's a bit less flexibility in the substitution of different medicines, and both will depend very sort of heavily on having strong warehousing operations to keep goods moving and make sure that they're in the right place and in the right condition.
Well, Claire Bottle, CEO of the UK Warehousing Association, we appreciate all your insights. Now, Professor Erik Golson is still with us. I'd like to get your take as well on the supply chain issues, because we live in such a globalized, interconnected world now, and you can have parts for one item being manufactured in various different countries. How will the crisis and the war in the Middle East impact on that?
It's just like COVID, right? In the sense that the supply chains are long, and one missing part, whatever that part might be, is going to slow down the manufacture of your phone, for instance, or whatever the item is. And those parts, a lot of them depend on oil as an input. So even if we think about something like a phone, it comes from 30 different countries. Some of those countries are in the Middle East.
30 different countries.
30 different countries. Some of them are in the Middle East. They'll be the war itself will affect their production capabilities, but then you have all the knock-on costs for moving those parts around between different locations. So this is going to be a significant increase in prices, and probably also problems for supply chains.
Erik Golson, we'll talk to you more in a minute, because we wanted to put a number on this economic cost of this war. So how much money is being lost by the continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz? The sustainability think tank Solability estimates it is costing the world economy $20.4 billion a day. And that includes oil and gas, other major global commodities, including fertilizers, iron ore, and aluminium, as well as container traffic. Now, stay with us, Erik Golson, because I want to get your thoughts on that as well. How much money is being lost? Looking to the future, if I may get you to get your crystal ball out, we might find ourselves in a situation where perhaps this current conflict is wrapped up, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz is not resolved, or perhaps if it's open, it might sporadically close again when the regional conflict intensifies. What are we facing here in the future?
This is the million-dollar question, right? We really don't know how much and how long we're going to be affected by this. The 20.4 billion is a wonderful number. We can use that as a benchmark to talk about the global effects. You're going to have GDP is going to come down 1 or 2% probably globally. Inflation will go up a couple of percent. But the longer this drags on, the longer that supply shortage drags on, the more complicated this is going to get for the economy, including fuel rationing in developing economies, which we've already seen.
Oh, well, that's quite a worrying thought to finish on, but we do appreciate it and everything else that you've told us about today. Professor Eric Golson of the University of Surrey, thank you so much. And that's all from me, Milana Veselinovic, and the team in London. Now back to Doha.
Thanks, Milana. Nigeria is one of Africa's largest oil producers, but fuel prices are soaring there too because of the volatility in energy prices caused by the U.S. and Israel's war against Iran. Many Nigerians are now struggling with sharp increases in transport and in food prices. Ahmed Idris reports from Lagos.
The Dangote refinery churns out 75 million litres of petrol a day, 20 million more than what Nigeria requires. But when the United States and Israel launched the war on Iran, petrol prices here jumped by 50% in the first month. By then, the refinery was struggling to get a third of what Nigeria's oil company promised it.
Yes, there is a problem. But we have, first of all, a location advantage. Crude can be sourced from Africa, crude can be sourced from US, Brazil, so our work can continue.
That helped the facility to continue operations. But the price shocks hit Nigerians and their businesses very hard as production and transport costs rise. Commercial tricycle operator Mustafa Olaide says his earnings have dropped significantly.
There's no profit now at all because the price of fuel is so expensive.
Like other businesses, he passes on the extra cost to his passengers.
The impact of a war thousands of kilometers away in Iran is already being felt in the daily lives of Nigerians. Rising global oil prices, triggered by disruptions in supply routes, are pushing up the cost of fuel here at home, subsequently raising the cost of goods, especially food items, in markets like this across the country.
Families are being forced to make adjustments.
Back then, we bought plenty of food items, but now we have to buy it in very small quantities so we can stay within our budget.
This means fewer and less nutritious meals. Nigeria is still tied to global oil markets, and the crisis in the Gulf will continue to impact Nigerians until domestic supplies increase. But as a long-term plan, Africa's biggest refinery is investing in drilling for its own oil.
Well, we've started small. We're going to be at about 20,000 barrels per day. We will ramp up. By next year, we should be able to hit about 60,000 barrels per day.
Not enough to meet the refinery's daily requirements, but a small step towards independent supplies. Until that independence is achieved, Nigerians may continue to endure petroleum price shocks from time to time. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Lagos, Nigeria.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines. U.S. President Donald Trump has removed Pam Bondi from her position as Attorney General. Bondi has been under pressure for her handling of the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. This is the second senior dismissal after Kristi Noem was removed from her post in the Department of Homeland Security in March. Our chief U.S. correspondent Alan Fisher has more from Washington.
She wasn't his first pick for Attorney General.
Such a nice person.
But Pam Bondi was always a Trump loyalist. One of the first cabinet members confirmed by the Senate she was a MAGA favorite, mainly because of her stated commitment to release all the Jeffrey Epstein files, the FBI investigation into the notorious child sex trafficker with high-profile links. She told Friendly Media his client list was on her desk. She was prepared to release it. But in July last year, the FBI, which comes under Bondi's control, admitted there was no list. That was a strike against her. When questioned about it in Congress, she said it should be more interested in the economy than Epstein.
The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000. You sit here and you attack the president, and I am not going to have it. I'm not going to put up with it.
In his first term, Trump raged against his attorneys general. Meant to be independent, he wanted someone who would pursue his enemies. He made it clear what was required when he posted what was meant to be a private message to Bondi, demanding action against his perceived enemies. She pushed a case against former FBI Director James Comey. It fell apart. That was another strike against her. Trump liked Bondi personally, loved she was combative in his defense.
Have you apologized to President Trump? Have you apologized to President Trump, all of you who participated in those impeachment hearings against Donald Trump. You all should be apologizing.
You're a big fan of Elvis, Pamela.
My mother was.
She travelled with him a lot, and he often publicly praised the job she was doing.
Pam Bondi has done a fantastic job. And Pam, would you say a few words, please?
Thank you, President Trump, and thank you for your leadership. And this is all about collaboration.
But her inability to stop the questions over Epstein, her failure to follow through against the president's perceived enemies, frustrated him. And her departure is the latest but biggest upheaval at the Justice Department in Trump's second term. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Several Palestinians have been killed as the Israeli military continues its operation in Gaza. Gunfire killed a woman east of Al-Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza. Another man was wounded after being shot by the Israeli army. Israeli attacks have killed at least 700 Palestinians since the U.S. brokered so-called ceasefire took effect in October. Gaza's health ministry, meanwhile, is facing a new crisis created by Israel's blockade. There's a growing shortage of industrial oil and spare parts, and it's threatening to close the few medical units still operating there. Hospitals have generators that have been damaged. Others are working at the limit of their capacity. If they fail, there will be no power to run Gaza's health system, putting the lives of hundreds of patients at risk. Ibrahim Al-Khalili reports from Gaza City.
After Israel destroyed more than 80% of Gaza's electricity distribution network and critical equipment, its manpower grid completely collapsed, leaving the Strip in darkness. As a result, hospitals across Gaza now rely entirely on backup generators, with critical spare parts, industrial oil, and power components banned from entering due to Israeli restrictions on so-called dual-use items. Even life-saving services face serious risk.
These generators require regular maintenance, including oil changes, filters, and spare parts. It's important to note that they are currently operating 24 hours a day. At present, spare parts, oils, and filters are not available in the Gaza Strip, which raises serious concerns that these generators may stop functioning, leading to a complete breakdown of health services in ministry facilities.
Al-Daraj Clinic is among the many healthcare centers across Gaza now relying entirely on backup generators. With industrial oil and spare parts in short supply, the clinic and others like it faces an imminent risk of shutting down.
If supplies are not restored within a day or two, services in primary healthcare centers will come to a complete halt. We also have vaccine fridges that are at risk of damage due to the lack of electricity.
For people in Gaza, the electricity crisis has turned everyday healthcare into a daily struggle.
Today, when someone comes to get an X-ray, they're told the power is out. If they want to receive medication or do a blood test, it's the same problem. There is not enough diesel to keep the generators running.
With power lines damaged or destroyed and essential supplies running low, every hospital, clinic, and patient in Gaza now faces uncertainty.
Behind me are the generators at Al Shifa Hospital.